Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I, first of all, would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'd like to introduce members of the panel. To my left is Carrie Linklater. To her left is Doug Marks. And our secretary today is Katie Sutherland. Our assessor is Brittany Santucci. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are recorded and will be part of the public record. And so we have Mr. Smith is double booked in 2 rooms, so we'll start with number 3, 2420 McPhillips Street. Then we'll go to 3690 Portage, and then we'll follow the order of the docket, if that's okay with everyone? Okay. And can you swear the parties in?
Certainly. Please state your name. Brittany Santucci. Do you swear that the items you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please state your name.
Trevor Smith.
Do you swear that the items you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Okay, we'll go to 2420 McPhillips. Ms. Santucci, if you could please read in the file and roll number and give your reports. Thank you.
Thank you. This is file number 19-600, roll number 05004730400. Address is 2420 McPhillips Street. This is a car dealership built in 2011. We have a leasable area of 17,903 square feet. If you turn to page 2, I have aerial shots of the property located on McPhillips Street, and an exterior photo which would be the old appearance of the property. If you turn to page 3, I just have some updated photos from December 2019. They've just expanded by 2,400 square feet as an addition, and it's stated fully renovated, the dealership. So on page 4, just some more pictures of the renovated space, and page 5 as well. Page 6, some more pictures, and on page 7, we just have the request for information that was received. Subject sale history, a dated sale with the sale price of $1, so you can take that into account. And for subject property leases, it's owner occupied. On page 8, I have the income workup for the vehicle dealership. So we have that 17,903 square feet leasable, and we've applied the model rent of $14.26 per square foot. We have a vacancy loss of 2%, expenses at the 2% this cycle, and shortfall of $6 per square foot. So and an overall capitalization rate of the 7.15%, which gives us an estimated market value of the $3,399,000. So on page 9, I have my rent comparables. We've used, obviously, we don't have dealership rents because most of them are owner-occupied, so we are comparing retail rents. So the average is $18.86, the median is $18.29. I would say some of these are obviously superior to the subject in the sense of there's more maybe retail floor space with them, different finishes, different areas. At the bottom I have auto comps. I'll just cross that out because there was some discussion on Friday about some of these not being either net or some issues, so I'm just going to cross them out until I can further review those. And then on page 10, I'm just going to cross out that chart as well because the coworker who created it wasn't able to confirm any of the information, like go over it with me just so I have an understanding. Page 11 is just the income value summary, and page 12 is our model drive capitalization rates. 13 is Municipal Assessment Act excerpts, and on page 14 is the start of the income and expense questionnaire for 2017, just showing that it's fully owner occupied. So they've put in some expenses in. Page 16 just shows the tenant and that it's owner occupied. On page 18 is just the permits that were the recent ones. So they had a partial permit on page 18 for the foundation. That was for the addition for the 2,400 square feet for $200,000. And then on page 19 we have the construct addition with the interior alterations. These are from June 2019, and the construction value was $2,800,000 for this permit, and then combined $3 million for both. Page 20 is just the section where it shows the addition of the rear and the grade from the permits I looked at. And on page 21 is the board of revision addenda for 2020. I'm sure everybody's going over this, so I'll be brief. Page 23 is just a fresh look for the every 2-year assessment, reassessment. On page 24 is our additional capitalization rate evidence, just to provide some additional evidence for our model cap rates. Page 25 is the non-recoverables. We're using the 2% non-recoverable. And for the IAA standards on page 26. So my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $3,399,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. Mr. Smith, any questions?
Yes, I do have a few. Just given the workload of the assessment department, you probably didn't have a chance to inspect this
I did not.
property.
The last person who would have been there was the person who just made the changes.
Okay, I was looking at the photos on 3 onwards. These are artist renderings, are they not?
They were the only ones I could find from the website. I don't think they were art. They looked to be true photos when I looked on the website,
Okay.
but
Okay, I just wanted to check on that, that's all. The valuation itself on page number 8, so this is all model derived?
yes.
Okay. And looking at the various components, so the rental sector, would you agree that we don't really have many arm's length auto dealer rental comparables on which to base it?
I would agree with that.
Okay, so that rental rate is not based on auto rents then, correct?
I'm unsure of how the model was produced by the modelers for this, but
Okay, it'd probably be drawn from other property types, I gather?
I can't speak to where it was from.
Okay. And the vacancy loss of 2%, do we know what has gone into that? That's an exceptionally low vacancy allowance. Seems to have dropped from the last cycle as well.
I guess it would have to do with what the modelers analyzed for the new cycle and chose to, if it dropped, it was based on the data they looked at.
Okay. Looking at the expenses, so obviously the city has has been pointed out already, has reduced the expense allowance from an overall 7%, which was inclusive of two sections, that being the 5%, what was termed management, and then the 2% structural, down to 2%. Is there, does the city itemize what's included in that 2% as far as what the expense allowances are? And what is not included?
It would be like maybe detailed in the model, or just?
Well, what expense categories would be accounted for in that 2%?
It would be structural, I can't remember all the lists, let's see if it's listed on my,
Okay.
I haven't gone over this in a while. I know we don't use leasing commissions, tenant inducements, asset management fees. That's about it.
So those three are stricken, okay. So, just to that end then, if there were leasing commissions that were incurred in a particular year, is it the city's suggestion then that those would be recoverable from the tenants in that, the non-recoverable section, so the 2% is intended to account for expense items that can't be recovered from tenants. So is the city suggesting that leasing commissions could be recovered from the tenants?
I'm not sure, we have the 2% non-recoverable expenses, and that's what we're using this year.
Okay, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, it's just questions that have to be asked, of course. The capitalization rate of 7.15%, so again, this is not based on auto dealership sales, correct? I'm unsure on what the modelers used for the data. I'm defending the 7.15% today. Okay. Or is the city aware that this is, the cap rate of 7.15% for this cycle is a significant drop from what the city had in the model for the last cycle?
I heard there's been a drop from the previous, yes, but I also noticed that some of our NOIs have also dropped, so if we use the lower NOI, higher cap rate, then we'll decrease
Okay.
that.
Just to that end with regard to capitalization rate, and again, I'm sorry to have to ask you these questions, but if the city's expense allowance has been reduced from an overall 7% to 2%, when the city's doing their cap rate modeling, would that, all other things being equal, would that not drive a higher net income when analyzing a property, and therefore a higher cap rate?
It would depend if the rent stayed the same or decreased, or some of the other parameters also changed.
Right, so if the vacancy rate had gone down, say, that would again drive the net income in the model higher and drive a higher cap rate as well?
If the vacancy went down, the NOI would possibly go up depending on, again, what the rental rate applied is.
Okay. Okay, just moving on to page number 9. So at the bottom of the page, we're just striking out these auto.
Yes, I haven't been able to review any of the issues we discussed on Friday afternoon, so I'm just gonna cross them out.
So we're going to ignore them for the
Ignore them,
purposes
yeah.
of today. Okay, great. So looking at the top chart of the page then, these are all retail comparables, all
Yes.
big box comparables.
Yes.
They would all be located in the Polo Park Retail Power Center node, etc. The Regent, is Regent on here?
I think it's
Yeah,
Pole Park.
there's a few Regent. The Keniston and McGilvery Retail Power Center node, so
Yes.
that would be the type of properties we'd be looking at
yes.
here. Generally, they'd all be national scale brand name retailers.
Yes.
Okay. So the city's contention is that this type of property is directly comparable to the auto dealerships?
I wouldn't say it's directly, like, exactly comparable. It is a brand name, that's a Hyundai company, well-known. Obviously, some of these spaces could have more retail floor space, less warehouse space, but that's again why the averages are higher and the median is higher than what we've applied to the subject property here today.
Okay, so there would be significantly more retail floor space in these comps than in, say, a traditional, call it 30-40 retail office, with the balance being service in an auto dealership?
Yeah, I guess depending on what the tenant is, I would say, obviously, some tenants might have more warehouse space in them depending on what the retail is.
Okay. So moving on to page 12 and the capitalization rate chart. So we have a 7.15% cap rate here. Would we be looking at, say, just looking at the lease comparables, would we be looking at a 20th percentile of the power center node? Is that what we're looking at?
I don't think it's specifically for that one, but it would fall between, I know for the dealerships, I think most of them are at 7.15 or around there. But they would probably, like, obviously these ones range from 6.15 to 9.4, but I don't think a dealership over 7.5 this cycle or under 7, so.
Okay, so if the physical split or layout of a dealership is, call it, in that 25 to 40% retail office showroom at the front, with the balance of, call it 60 to, well, call it 60%, 60 to 75% service garage at the back, would that not be more of an industrial use? Is there
I
any
wouldn't-
consideration taken into account of that category and determination of either the lease rates or the cap rate?
I'm unsure. I just know based on the photographs of most car dealerships, even with the service in the back, I would say they're more comparable to a retail than an industrial look of a building. But even with the rear being a service garage, I'd say there's still the nice retail usually at the front and the office space and the mezzanines.
Okay, is the city aware of other decisions regarding automotive dealerships on the McPhillips strip in the 2020 realty cycle that suggest a significantly lower rental rates and higher cap rate?
I haven't talked to my coworkers, and this is a new hearing, so I think it's based on what here today with a fully renovated building. I think the rent applied seems fair, and we have our capitalization rate we're defending, so.
Okay, I do have some rebuttal to pass out on that point, if I could, at whatever point you would.
Sure,
Is
yeah,
this
fine.
the appropriate time, or? Thank you. Thank you. Let's wait till everybody's got it there. So, just from an equity perspective, we're looking at a couple of decisions that relate specifically to automotive dealerships on the McPhillips strip from the 2020 Board of Revision Realty Appeal Cycle, that being 2610 McPhillips Street, that being the first one. Mr. Story here, I believe, represented that property. The decision taken on that was at a rate of $11.50 a square foot with a cap rate of 7.75%. Then we have another property on McPhillips, 2400 McPhillips Street, also decided based on the applicant's net operating income, which is shown just onwards at $11.28 a square foot, and the same cap rate of 7.75%. I think those are the, is that the two that we have here, 2610, 2400, and then the final one is 1400 McPhillips. Again, another McPhillips Street auto dealership, decided at $11.50 a square foot, at a 7.75% cap rate. And I should also mention the inclusion, or rather re-inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable allowance in addition to the 2%. So I just wanted to ensure that that information was available.
Ms. Santucci, any questions?
I guess I
On the
wish I had our decisions from Friday, maybe I could have brought those ones, I don't know what those are gonna be, but, I don't know the quality of these buildings or the age, so I can't really speak to the rates applied to them, but I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Ms. Linklater, any questions on the rebuttal?
Yeah, Mr. Smith, do you know, I'm just looking through this rebuttal package, the ages of these car dealerships?
I guess for brevity's sake, I did not include the full package from the appellant, but I know that Mr. Story is here today, so he could fill you in on the actual dates of each of those buildings. Some of them are older, certainly. This is a newer constructed property that we're looking at, but I'll have information with regard to that factor as well.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Mr. Marks?
No, for me, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that's all of my questions, thank you.
And so, Ms. Linklater, do you have any questions of the assessment?
Yes, so there was an addition put on this.
Yes,
You included the permits.
yes.
Sorry, and I didn't add them up. What was the total?
It's
Almost 3
3
million?
million, that would be including the 200,000 for the permit, for the foundations.
And what was done?
So from what I read, there was the 2,400 square foot addition at the rear. I think it was in the rear, I'll double check here when I printed it out. Or maybe it was at the front for the showroom. And then it just said fully renovated interior space. And when I had looked at previous photos and then compared them to the current photos, it looked like, and then from the notes I read from my coworkers that inspected and made the changes to the roll, I based on that.
Okay. So you have field notes on this then?
I actually haven't brought them with me, I just realized I normally print them out. I reviewed them when I looked at the brief, but that's all. I don't have dates or anything to provide you.
Okay. And I'm sorry, the pictures taken on 4 and 5 were taken from? the
These are
web-
just online on their website. I could just, the photos in our system, I'm not sure if the person who inspected it didn't take new ones. The only ones I could find were outdated ones.
Okay, so,
From, like,
so we don't know
maybe-
what the date of these photos are?
When I looked on the website and read up, it sounded like they were fully expanded and renovated by December 2019. So
Okay,
current to the January 1st, 2020.
okay. So you are not 100% sure then what the renovation was?
Oh,
In terms
just
of-
from what my
I think you s-
coworker wrote, it was just fully renovated for the like showroom, office area space, and then with the addition.
Right, I'm just asking
Yeah.
about, in regards to the addition, what it was
Oh.
specifically.
What shows on here, on page 20,
Sorry.
the part in the gray. So it looks like that would be part of the showroom and office space. And when I reviewed the permits, I just confirmed that that was the space that was added.
Just a rhetorical question, is that not unusual on a fairly new build to add office and showroom?
Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe when they built it in 2011, again, like I've heard the dealerships state what they want done and the person who owns it does it, so I
Correct.
guess they wanted a
Correct.
refresh and.
We heard a lot of that on
Yeah.
Friday.
So.
And your comps on page 9,
Yes,
all retail, all big box.
yes.
And I think, let me think. Ellis is is that the former Sears store?
Currently at the Staples, so it was demised into 2 units.
Right. And 1250 St. James, that's the Ashley Furniture.
It was the brick and then the portion of where the trampolines tenant is. I've never been there, but
Okay.
this is just trampolines.
And 1080 Nairn?
Is a retail secondhand store, the Salvation Army. And then Comp 4 is the furniture store.
Well, that's the Ashley.
Yes.
What's 840 St. James?
That I have as the craft store Michael's.
And so you have no auto dealerships because they are not typically sold.
No, of the last ones
Owner-occupied.
I've dealt with, it seems they're all owner-occupied, common ownership.
Okay. That's all my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks.
My question's been answered, thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions, Mr. Smith?
Okay, thank you. So we're dealing with 2420 McPhillips Street today. This is Birchwood Hyundai property. As already stated, property was originally built in 2011, and the Automotive brand itself, as we've discussed many times on Friday there, most recently, the automotive dealership owners themselves are, call it, at the mercy of the automotive brands as far as the look and size and orientation, et cetera, of their physical dealership footprint. The brands themselves have a huge degree of control over who has the dealerships in their markets, so they dictate if they need a new dealership on site, entirely new dealership, if they need you to expand, if they need you to update the look of the retail showroom, the exterior, add-on service bays, things of that nature. So if the property owners were to essentially refuse for whatever reason, the dealerships then just essentially take that dealership and move it on to a different owner, as there's no as they would do in the marketplace. So as the owner of the property and operator of the dealership, you essentially have to comply with what the brands themselves specify with regard to the look of your property. So that's what we're looking at here as far as the expansion. The original property was somewhat smaller than it is now. They did have to expand in the 2019 timeframe as shown. I think the terminology of a full renovation is somewhat misleading in that they did do a full reskin of the outside of the property. If you look at probably the best picture of it is the top one on page 3 of the city's brief, so you can see call it exterior treatment along the top has been adjusted to fit Hyundai's most recent rebranding exercise. If you flip back a page, you can see that it's a little different. I believe it used to be blue. So now they've gone with this kind of fish scale type look at the top. Is it an improvement to the realty itself? It's a rebranding essentially to match the look of Hyundai in its current state. The glazing is essentially the same. What has changed obviously is the interior of the showroom office area. So just to illustrate, we can look at the photos for the property beginning on page 2. You've got a couple of exteriors there. At the bottom of page 3, you have the original interior of the showroom with the tile as it was. Move on to page 4, and you can see the new tile and wall treatment, etc. there. So that's essentially what you're looking at is the difference. They have redone the showroom and office area, but the majority, or the balance of the building being the service area, obviously there's no redoing of that. So there has been money sunk into it, but it's not an entirely new building by any means. So our exercise here today is to come up with market value. What the city has done in their valuation is essentially look at big box retail. Now I just need to point out how that is not appropriate. If you look at the structures, if you look at a standard automotive dealership, you're looking at between 25 and 40% of that being retail showroom office space at the front where they show the cars, have the individual offices for the salespeople and managers, and the balance of it being the service area. So you have between 60 and 75% of it being service essentially. Now, if you look at it with obviously demising between the front and the back, if you look at it, and that means the back is service garage, but more industrial nature of use, and the front being that kind of showroom retail flex warehouse almost type of space. If you look at comparable properties in the marketplace, so the city's looking at the big box retail. Big box retail is clustered in retail nodes for a particular reason. Obviously, they build power centers to enable shoppers to hit all the different categories of types of retail that they want to hit, and they're built big and square with high ceilings, etc., in order for the retailers to maximize the selling floor space. So you walk into a Michaels or a Canadian Tire or a Walmart or what have you, and the majority of that building is selling floor, and the majority of it has aisles that are stacked, call it 3 or 4 high, so the product is warehoused on the floor itself. It's not got a separate area at the back for warehousing. They have shipping, receiving at the back and a small degree of warehousing, but the majority of the actual product is on the floor itself. So they're selling product from, call it 90+% of that building, whereas that's a different setup from auto dealers. They're also located in very high traffic areas, retail dominant, and you're going to drive a lot more business out of those facilities than you are out of automotive dealerships. Indeed, you can't take a Michaels and move it into an auto dealership. It simply wouldn't happen. That dealership would need to be demolished and taken out. And a new structure built if one were to look at putting a big box retailer on site. So let's move on to the valuation itself. We've seen the photos, description of the property. There's a bit on my page number 1. We're looking at a C4 zoning, that being a lower grade of zoning than your typical big box zoning. 3 acres. We have a relatively good land to plan area ratio for this particular property at a little over 8. And you can see our past appeal history with the subject property as well, located on my page number 1 there. I would point out that we have appealed the 2018 border revision decision to the municipal board, and we're awaiting scheduling for that at this time. So let's move on to the site. Site is shown on page 5, and the aerial on page 6. So if we look at the location of this particular property, so the intersection of Leela and McPhillips is located about a block and a half to the south of this. So your Garden City Shopping Center is there. Essentially, we are just inside the area where greenfields exist. So you're not in a high traffic area. You're close to one, but you're not in it. You're north of it on this section of McPhillips. There is, so there's a lot less traffic, a lot less retail, a lot less reason to be passing by there. So there are dealerships, obviously, that are located further south on McPhillips that would receive more traffic. However, they have also received lower rental rates in their decisions as well. If we look at my page number 6, there's some description of where the big box stores are located in relation to the subject. I'll leave that for you to review. Suffice it to say, we're north of the area that all of that is located in, and it does not drive the same degree of business to this location that it would if you were located on the same site as the other big boxes, etc. The background of the automotive industry, I feel, is important. If we look at my page number 7, the entire retail sphere is changing. You see the massive shift to online shopping. Indeed, we probably all just did some online shopping for Christmas time. This is happening in the automotive market as well. In the retail market, we're seeing a significant number of big box stores go dark as their model is not working for them any longer as people do their shopping online. If you look at the automotive sector, people can now go online, do all of the research that they want with regard to the type of auto they want, their different options, different build outs, etc. They can price shop online and then go and buy their car. So what we see in the industry is a lot less need for automotive dealers themselves. So what is starting to happen is that the brands are looking at having a lot fewer dealers in a market, but a lot bigger dealers. So they're moving towards more of a distribution type of realty, where they have a bigger center and you go and pick up your car and sign for it and all of those things, but you don't have to go and shop at 3 different brands of the same type in the same city. So there's less of a need for this type, and so there will be a phase out of this type of realty. Beyond that, we're also looking at Amazon probably entering the automotive market in Canada. Obviously, we know what Amazon is like. They are doing this in the European market now. They are coming to North America, and this will lead to a lowering of price margins, faster product delivery, and huge price competitiveness on the market, which will impact, obviously, the existing dealers, etc. We're also seeing a relatively flat line in terms of automotive sales in the subject time frame. So that's the background. Let's move on to the valuation relatively quickly here. What we have is a unique situation where we have very, very few actual arm's length full-scale dealerships, if any. So what we need to do is look at appropriate model for determining fair rental rates as well as vacancy and other expenses. So what we've done is look at the automotive sector itself, and then showroom retail type of rental rates as well, which would be comparison to the front end of these dealerships where you have the showroom retail for these types of properties. So looking at My rental comparables for the automotive sector, if you look at page number 9, we have a significant number of them running on to page number 10. I will point to number 8. This is 231 Oak Point Highway. This is former Harley Davidson dealership located out on Oak Point Highway. It has now become a used car dealer in the same location. They just signed a lease in 2017 at $7 per square foot on a 5-year term. Now, it's not exactly the same as a full-line auto dealer. They do have service in the back and showroom at the front. It's a little smaller, somewhat comparable in size to the subject. The location would probably be considered somewhat inferior, and the age of this one is a little bit older than the subject. But you can see that the rental rate is significantly below where we have arrived at in our value. The other automotive comps that we have here are generally service or collision centers, so comparable to the back end of a dealer. And we have rates ranging from that $6.50 a square foot, $7.99, $9.33, $9.22, all for very well located properties. Skurfield, Osborne, St. Anne's, pardon me. And we have one downtown indeed, right downtown on Fort, which is a Fountain Tire, which has a lease struck in 2018 at $13 a square foot. So high value real estate, $13 a square foot, right in the center of downtown. Move on to the next page, page number 10. The only other sales related one that I have is is my number 11. It's actually 3680 Portage Avenue, not Pembina. And I have a slight error in this, in that we only have the main floor area of 7,200 square feet. It's actually got a mezzanine space of over 400 square feet as well, so that would drive your rental rate down from $12.50 down into the $11 or $12 range. So, showroom retail at the bottom. What we've tried to do again is show you well-located showroom retail, kind of flex warehouse space that would be comparable to the front end of the dealership. So our 400 Fort White Way property, the first two there, this is located just west of Costco on McGilvery Boulevard. You have Enns Brothers and Sky Zone there, 2013 leases at $11 and $11.90 again. High cube flex warehouse space, well built out. 996 Lorimer, this is number 3. This is located between Waverly and Kenaston. This is Dynasty Bathrooms, 2016 lease at $13.10 a square foot. Very well located, very well built, high visibility flex warehouse space. Property at 1290 Kenaston, numbers 4 and 5. This is a former industrial building that has been fully renovated in 2015 and turned into that flex warehouse space. We have TransCanada Brewing in there. 2016 lease for 10 years at $12 a square foot. And indeed another flex warehouse tenant beside that. Lux Barbecue, 2016 lease, $12.50 a square foot. There's a few others there. I'll let you go through those if you wish, but you can see that our range is generally in that $11 to $13 a square foot range for that front end of the house. So looking at the subject property, it's a smaller automotive dealership, but not too small. It's at 17,000+ square feet. It's relatively recent. It has had a bit of a refresh on the front end of the property. So looking at our comparables in relation to the subject, we used a $12.50 a square foot net rental rate as appropriate for the subject. Moving on from there to the expense side of the equation, obviously we don't have any direct comparables with regard to vacancy. What we have done is give you the stats for both retail and industrial vacancy in the city from the Johnson report. We're looking at roughly 7% vacancy in the industrial sphere for investment properties, and a little lower than that for retail in the call it 4 to 6% range. So we've used an overall rate of 5%. With regard to vacancy, I would point out that these are very special use properties, so their reuse potential is relatively low. While we do have one on Oak Point that did get reused as a used car dealer, it very much depends on the site, the building, etc., whether that would be possible. Certainly you can't use them for other types of retail. It's either used cars or nothing, essentially. I would point to Winnipeg Honda as a good example of this. It was located on South Pembina, just roughly a block north of the Perimeter Highway. It moved to the Waverley Auto Mall, and the owner looked to release that property for many years. It was impossible to do. He was unable to do so. Demolished the building and had a vacant site for a period of time. It's now being redeveloped as multifamily property in that site. We also have another property that I dealt with on Friday at 1310 Regent, property built in 1987. It was a smaller dealership at 8,000 square feet. It has recently been demolished, and they're rebuilding on that site with a larger dealership, as it simply didn't match the market anymore. So your reuse potential of these is quite low. Moving on to the expense allowance side, I'll be relatively quick here, as we've heard this numerous times. I'll try and be concise. The city formerly allowed two different expense categories in their model, running from roughly 2000 through 2018. This changed for the 2020 cycle. They removed what was termed the 5% management allowance, stating that it was representative of property management fee, and that these fees were recoverable. These fees have always been recoverable, and we don't argue that fact. The issue is that the 5% was meant as recapture, or inclusion rather, of non-recoverable expenses that the owner incurs that they cannot recover from their tenants through standard lease terms. So in normal leases, there's a certain amount there's certain things that one can recover, those being your normal operating expenses. Beyond that, any expenses that are incurred are borne by the landlord. So looking at the standard appraisal standard appraisal theory, as shown at the bottom of page 12, as presented by the Appraisal Institute of Canada through their main text, we have operating expenses that are paid by the landlord being deducted from the effective gross income to arrive at the net operating income. Nobody's in disagreement with that. It's what's included in those expenses that is in disagreement between the city and the appellants. So if we read through my page number 13, you can see why these expenses need to be included. And as stated, the city wasn't sure what the inclusions are in their 2%. Typically, when one's doing an appraisal for financing or other terms, there's an allowance made for these types of expenses. Structural itself is typically 1 to 2%, or you can do it on an amount per square foot. So that tends to be 1 to 2% on its own. Outside of that, there's an allowance that's made for the other categories, these being professional fees. So one can't expect the tenants to pay for your legal or accounting fees. That's a cost that's borne by the owner for operating that real estate. Asset management, it's a very small portion of the market for large owners. It certainly should be included in this, but it's doesn't apply to very many properties in the market at all. Landlord work is representative of work that the landlord has to do to bring the property up to a base level of occupancy once another tenant moves out. So not improving it for the tenant, just improving it to the point that it can be occupied. Repair work, essentially. Leasing commissions, tenants are not going to pay for leasing commissions for the landlord to lease the property out to them. That's very clear. That's not something that would be recovered through a standard lease. Tenant improvements. This is money that the landlord pays for the unit to be built out to the spec of the tenant. Typically, what happens here is that the landlord will make an allowance of a certain amount of money and or build out the space for the tenant. This will drive up the rental rate a bit. And what's essentially been decided at the municipal board is that one can't deduct those expenses from the net rental rate. So you can't bring the rental rate down to reduce the income, but those expenses are there, so they have to be reflected on the other side of the equation, that being the operating side. Owner repair and maintenance, outside of structural repair, marketing of the property, tenants aren't going to pay for your marketing of the property. In competitive markets, you have free rent, often is the case, that's certainly the case in Winnipeg in many cases. Credit checks, property management fees, typically property management is recoverable in all but very few cases. So that's a very small portion of the market again, typically government. Reflecting this particular issue, we at Stevenson did a 3-year historical review of properties in the marketplace where we had full access to year-end income and expense statements. And we covered the years 2016 through 2018 in doing our analysis. So what we were trying to determine here is what percentage of the effective gross income would be driven, would be representative of non-recoverable expenses. You can see our results in the chart. We had a net 3-year average non-recoverable expense of 11.5%, exclusive of tenant improvements, 12.7% inclusive of tenant improvements, and our property count for these studies ranged between 45 and 53 in our study. So we're not asking for the expense allowance to be increased to 11 or 12%. We're simply asking for the reintroduction of the 5% in addition to the 2% to accurately reflect the expenses that the landlord incurs. Shortfall amount, we have used the city's $6 as it is reflective of market. And we can move on to the capitalization rate. Now, obviously there's no arm's length transactions one can build a cap rate on from these. What we have done is look at 2 different categories, that being the industrial sphere as well as the retail sphere. And as you can see from our charts here, industrial being the one at the top, these are all true market investment transactions purchased for the in-place income. We have ranges typically between 7 to 7.5% for the industrial, with one at 8.3. Retail, again, being in that 7 to 7.5, 7.6 range, with one higher at 9.1%. The commercial brokerages provide some background with regard to this as well. Now, looking at cap rates for automotive dealers, it's clear that these are very special use properties. They have very limited potential for re-tenanting on the market. If you do so, it's at a lower level of use, and obviously lower rental level than one would expect at a full line dealership. And the layout is not conducive to any other uses. So as shown in many instances, there is no reuse potential. There's nobody to occupy the building, so they essentially have a shelf life and can be demolished in a relatively short period of time. So there is a significant degree of risk that's present with automotive dealerships that is not present in other standard investment classes. This is evidenced by the fact there not being an automotive real estate investment trust that buys up these properties. Looking at the appropriate cap rate for these properties, you're going to be above that typical range to reflect the risk that's incurred. 8% is what was decided largely in the last cycle. We have seen no shift. There's been no sales, obviously, with arm's length leases to reflect any change. So we have gone with the same 8% cap rate that was decided in the 2018 cycle for the 2020 cycle. And indeed, if you look at the future, we see a shift happening in that market, so it's not apt to go any lower than where it is at the present time. Cap rate in 2016 was at 8.5%. So if you look at the bottom of my page 15, you can see the summary of our valuation: $12.50 square foot rental rate, 5% cap, with the re-inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable allowance and an 8% cap rate, rather, 5% vacancy. Gives us our final market value of $2,404,000. You can see the city's 2020 valuation in comparison to their 2018 valuation on that page as well. And then at the back of the brief, I have also included further decisions on automotive dealerships from this cycle with regard to properties on Nairn and Regent, which are illustrative of rental rates being decided in and around that $11 a square foot range, with a higher cap rate as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do you have any questions?
Yes. Page 14, your capitalization rates. The only two cap rates over age were from 2015.
That's correct.
And then my only other question is based on what they just invested into the property for $3 million. If there's such a decline in the market, why invest in the dealerships?
So what you're seeing again is the control that the automotive brands exercise. The reinvestment is not driven by the ownership. It's driven by the brands. They're forced to do these investments, and in having represented this particular client for a long time, they have told me on numerous occasions that these refreshments of these buildings do not drive any more actual sales, is their knowledge, having gone through this process on a number of dealerships. What you see in the marketplace is a consolidation where they have to grow, so you get a few owners owning more and more dealerships rather than smaller ones. So you have the issue of concentration. You have to grow in order to survive. We're not valuing business factors here, we're just valuing the real estate.
I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Marks?
Yes, on that construction and upgrade that was done to the facility, was there anything done in the shop area at all?
No. To my knowledge, no. And I didn't walk through the shop, I walked through the showroom, because that was where it was indicated that they were doing all of the renovation. So the shop is the shop, essentially.
Okay. And as far as storage area? Storage area in that facility, was there any additional storage area added?
The showroom was expanded slightly on that one end, so they would be able to put another, call it car or two, on display up front, if that's what you mean.
And the other area for storage in the back for storage of parts and that sort of thing?
No.
Anything additional there?
No, to my knowledge, they didn't expand the back section. It was just that front end of the showroom office.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Ms. Linklater?
Yes, Mr. Smith, first question. So this was built by Birchwood in 2011?
It was, yes.
Okay. So page 13 of your, oh, sorry, and so you inspected?
I have, yes.
Okay, and you saw the renovation of the,
I did.
and it's just an office? Or what?
Well, it's the front end, right? So they put in new tile, they changed the offices a little bit, so there's more glazing on the front of them, they're more transparent. Just a bit of a reconfiguration and a refreshment, new paint, that type
And the
of thing.
recladding on
then
the outside?
Yeah, that front, you can see the recladding of the roof line there.
Okay, thank you. So page 13 of your brief, this is referring to the 5% non-recoverable. So would you say that dealerships are unique?
They're a unique type of property, yes, they're a special use property.
And I'm gonna go so far as to say, are they not unique, although this is owner-operated, that they are dictated by the manufacturer,
They are, yes.
as previously discussed on? So when the manufacturer says you need to do X amount to make your building up to our standards, they have no choice, correct?
Well, they have the choice in that they could say no, but then they would lose their dealership
Correct.
rights essentially, so they
Correct.
have no choice ultimately.
Right. So, page 13 of your brief then, would that go under landlord work, do you think?
Oh, the reinvestment in the building?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, essentially it would probably fall in either landlord work. It's not really a repair and maintenance item. One could call it tenant improvement as well, I suppose.
Okay. For instance,
Or a
you had,
portion of.
right, so for instance, you had mentioned the tile having to be replaced. Right, so this is a 2011 building,
It is a 2011 building.
yes, and I know we had discussed the tile issue previously. Can I redirect to the signature? Santucci, you stated earlier that, you brought into evidence that the cap rate is based on big box, or the rent comparables, sorry.
The rent
Based on,
comparables, yes.
right. So, I know in the past there have been a few dealerships, and I'm going to say a few because I don't have a number, that have gone dark. So, do you know, to the best of your knowledge, if any of those have been occupied by any big box stores?
I'm actually unsure of which ones have, I'm not, I can't speak to that yet. I don't have any knowledge of which ones have closed and not.
Okay.
But when I think of something that could go in a car dealership, I think of like a P.A. Robinson type of thing where you have, or like a tile, where you could have like a showroom at the front and have all your stuff at the back. That's the only thing I could really think of. I'm unsure of what has happened to some of them.
Okay. Are you aware of, this is going back a few years, a dealership on Portage, McNaught, by the University of Winnipeg?
Is that the one close to Maryland or Sherwood?
Yeah, right around.
That had the ramp at the back?
Yes.
I do know where that is, yes.
Okay.
It was Vespa's, too, I think. That's what I remember, is Vespa's.
So you're aware that that dealership
It's demolished.
is demolished? Yeah. You're aware that they tried to rent it for many years?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree that Portage is a good retail space?
I guess with that one, there wasn't a lot of land to building ratio. I would think that would be the biggest downfall there, because there's just, it's for the site size, and the building pretty much took up the whole site from what I remember, so. It's kind of a different, I'm not even sure when that one was constructed, so
Yeah.
maybe it was
Back
way
in the
back when
50s.
it's designed for that reason, so.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Mr. Smith, I just have a quick question on your page 13.
Okay.
The table.
Yes.
Did any of your counts include car dealerships?
They did not, no.
Okay, so what types of properties are these?
These are retail, industrial, and office properties that our firm had management of, that we had full access to the statements on.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. No more questions for me. Any need for summation?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll just give Mr. Story a minute to come back.
Sorry, Brad.
Yeah, sure. We'll take a 5-minute break. And then
Okay.
Thank you.
With diet, don't get to eat lunch, just go right from one ear to the other.
We will.
Fly in the rapid. Yeah.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. The next property on the docket is 3690 Portage Avenue. And could you please swear in Mr. Story?
Yeah. Sydney,
Sid Story.
do you swear that the evidence you're going to present today is the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Ms. Santucci, if you'd like to begin?
Thank you. This is file number 19-3920, roll number 07569002300. Address is 3690 Portage Avenue. This is a car dealership built in 1988, leasable area of 7,300 square feet. If you turn to page 2, we have an aerial shot of the dealership. It's the narrow lot. It's located on Portage Avenue. And we have an exterior photo. I looked, we didn't have any interior photos on file, and I have not been in this building,
And I couldn't find any notes in regards to the past few years of interior quality.
So on page 3, the request for income and expense received, no subject sale history, and for subject property leases, again, there's just the common ownership owner occupied. On page 4, we have the vehicle dealership Workup, so we have, this is a bit of a smaller dealership, I guess, 7,300 square feet. Rental rate, $13.80 applied, and we have the 2% vacancy loss, 2% expenses, and shortfall of $6 per square foot. So for this dealership, we have a capitalization rate of 7.3% and an estimated value of $1,313,000. On page 5, is just my rent comparables we've gone over. So again, cross out the auto ones just because there were some issues with them on the Friday hearing. Page 6, I'm going to cross out that chart as well because I haven't discussed it with my coworker. And page 7 is just the income value summary. So page 8, again, is the model drive capitalization rates. If we turn to page 10, this is just what was submitted for this 2017 income and expense questionnaire. So it starts on page 12. We just got dealer financial statements. So I had sifted through that, found some expenses and stuff related to property taxes and whatnot for the building. And on page 17 is just the Board of Division addenda I've gone over. So my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $1,313,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. Mr. Story, do you have any questions?
Yes, very, very briefly. On page 1 of your brief, this particular property is, we have said the owner has 7,200 square feet, but you have 7,300 square feet, and is 1 acre of land?
We don't have it listed in acres, just the land area of the 44,100.
So it's 1 acre, it's 43,560 is an acre, okay? So it's 1 acre of land?
Mhm.
And this particular property has a property use, CMV CD, which is a complete auto dealer.
Yes.
Can you think of any complete auto, by complete it means it has all the categories, auto body, service, parts, sales, offices, has all those parts. Can you think of any complete auto dealer that would be under 15,000 square feet other than this one?
I think of all the ones I've looked at this year, this one would be the smallest,
Small.
yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to add, I just noticed it today and I apologize. The owner's always treated this as 7,200 square feet. Is there some note in your work changed? I've done it for many years.
And just this year? Was it?
I believe this first year's been 73.
Yeah.
I will live with 73, I have no
Yeah,
problem,
I
I just
didn't
don't know
see-
why it changed.
I'm not sure, I didn't see a note saying that there was an area change,
Okay.
but if it was smaller last year, I didn't see a note that it increased.
Okay.
I can't speak to last year.
We're fine with 73, I'm just, I don't know where it
okay.
came from, that's all. And if you just, we'll cut to the quick, if we go to page 4, we'll kind of go through our statement of issues, and interestingly enough, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 components, and unfortunately, we disagree on all of them. So I'm going to start by saying the statement of issue, number 1, is a model rent has been used at $13.80, is that correct?
Yes.
And one presumes that if it's a model, it's because it's an accumulation of like properties,
Yeah.
and then it hits a midpoint. But there are no other 7,000 square foot complete auto dealerships, agreed?
Not that I can think of, it
Okay.
seems smaller.
So statement of issues from our point, number 1 is we think that's model driven, and we don't know that the inputs would arrive at a meaningful discussion. So we're disagreeing with that. Secondly, the vacancy loss of 2% is less than vacancy on multi-tenant residential. It's about 2.7% in the city of Winnipeg. When you get into retail, even Mr. Smith's company Stevenson reported last year that citywide retail is 6%. And historically, the dealerships have used 5%. Last year, they used 5% as vacancy, the city used. That's not intended to reflect the vacancy of a car dealership. It's whatever the model generated, and the model must be confused because it's sort of car dealership and it's sort of retail, correct? The 2% is not typically reflective of retail.
It seems that retail has higher percentage.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the modelers determined based on the fact that this still is a car dealership
Okay.
maybe, but.
Okay. So the second item, first is a market rent, second is vacancy. So we have very little evidence from the city that supports this. It's 2%. Is that correct? Other than the modelers did it?
Yes, we don't have anything in our brief for additional vacancy evidence.
Okay. And then we go to cap rate. There's been seemingly the modeler, we can beat the modeler. He seems to run our lives. The modeler has decided that there's cap rate compression in the auto industry. Using 7.3, last year we, for the most part, used 8% on car dealerships. And you have very little evidence to support your 7.3, correct?
We don't have any car dealership sales in the brief
Yeah.
or anything.
Okay. So, there's only 4 elements. We disagree with them. The one thing, and this is not a shot at you, but the onus here is on the department, it's not on us. So when the department comes and says, well, we have a market rent, but it's generated by a model, I really can't tell you. That seems to fly in the face of everything that's happening in the real world. But we accept that because we have to argue, and we will. But each element we have to question, so you really wonder, we're not even dealing, the city's not even dealing with car dealerships when you're looking at some of these market rents, for example, where you're looking at some big box. And we had this situation before last year, today too. If we go to your next page, page 6, what happened is the city appears to have tried to come up with some blend between retail and auto service garages. And then because the issues there were not typical of a car dealership, the auto service garage at the bottom, you've suggested we strike it, and I agree it should be stricken. Not because you haven't had time to find the information, but because they're not comparable. MPI Claim Center, which is the first one, it's hardly comparable to an auto dealership. The lease is signed with the provincial government. They tell you what they're going to pay. They're done by tender. So we're ignoring that auto portion of it that would have otherwise been a contributor to the plan, correct? We're striking the bottom of page 5?
Yes.
Before, okay. And then, let's go up and go to big box retail. In the big box retail, the first one, if you look at the first, first 4 leases are in 217, so they're realistic, they're timely. But what are they? Well, the first one is the Sears Furniture that closed, and subsequent, remember that Sears closed when we talk about what vacancy should be in retail. And Staples, it was demised into Staples and one other big box, and that's at the corner of Ellis and St. James. That's about as hot a retail as we get. Would you agree?
Pretty busy area.
They went broke. They closed. Sears closed. They didn't sublet, they closed. And 1250 St. James Street is a brick, which is also right across the street from this property. Do you agree, 1250?
That one's actually the brick clear, what was the brick clearance store, but
Yeah.
it's the unit next door, it's that trampoline.
Yeah,
Ten.
I'm not familiar with the trampoline place. The trampoline is a reality. Okay, and 1080 Nairn is an odd place. That's a thrift shop.
Yeah. a
Salvation
larger
Army thrift shop.
yeah.
That's a tough one. And then the last one is Ashley Furniture, which is
Across the
quite
street.
magnificent on the corner of St. James and Ellis.
Yes.
And a high degree of finish throughout, and a big box store, and by definition, big box is big because they're high, it's all based on volume. And everything is warehoused, is showing, as Mr. Smith mentioned, they're all on the floor, everything's on the showroom floor.
I would say yes.
So it's a bit of a, in my opinion, and tell me if I'm wrong, or I'll ask you, it's a bit of a stretch using big box without any comparable adjustments, would you agree?
Yeah, it would all depend on like what type of big box store it was, because like, for example, the Ashley Furniture, I wouldn't say it's a super fancy interior, it's more of the product that would make it look
Yes.
better.
Yeah.
So certain ones that there is like a nicer finish to the, like, customer service areas or bathrooms or whatnot.
I'm going to give you an example because we talked earlier about McNaught Motors, which is, Gordon is a dear friend of mine, and they were clients of ours for many years.
Is this part of your evidence, Mr.
No,
Smith?
it's
Oh, we have a question, okay.
Question. When you talk about these principal substitutions, these buildings could be used, are you aware that the McNaught Motors building at Unit 1000, I think it's 1717, it is 1717, Waverly, has 18 overhead doors, 18 of them, which includes a service drive-through. So clearly, there are different types of properties than a box retail. That's all I'll say. And would you agree that they're not? And then the next page 6, we're striking because they can't be verified.
The assessor that created it,
Yeah.
I can't speak to him about it, so I didn't want to speak to something that I didn't understand.
Okay, and then we go to page 8, and that's all the city gives the property owners on cap rate, but there's a degree of uncertainty because there is no category in here for dealerships.
No, there is not.
And there's no sales anyway if there was a category, right? So there's not much can be garnered from that. And then we go to the cap rate, the last information the owners, property owners have been given, or agents have been given. I can't find it, but it's got the cap rates, pardon me, the retail cap rates There's one neighborhood shopping center which seems to be the most appropriate in the list, and it's in the range of 7.4%. But that wasn't intent, that was, those 4 leases, they were released from the city as additional information, is just to give the board some guidance.
So just additional information for certain property types, just to have more.
Okay. And then I won't bore anybody anymore. And that'll be fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Story. Ms. Linklater?
Did you have a chance to inspect?
For this one, I did not, no, and I've never been in the building prior.
Okay. Do you have any field notes or anything?
There was nothing
prior?
recent, and I don't think there's like, I couldn't see any recent permits or anything for it, so I'm guessing it's pretty standard to what it's been for the past 10 years.
So 7,300 square feet, you would agree that this is very tiny?
Compared to most of 15,000, I would say most are
32,000,
yeah.
28,000.
I'm guessing that's
tiny.
based on the age, because it was built in the 80s,
Right.
so it's kind of an older dealership.
Which leads me to my next question. You are aware that there is a lifespan to a dealership?
It seems to be what I've learned in the past couple weeks, that they don't last longer than 30 to 40 years before they're either renovated or torn down.
Scraped in. Okay. You are removing page 5 and page 6, and I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Marks?
And my question's been answered, thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions. Mr. Story, when you're ready.
Thank you. I will be brief. There have been some changes in the building in the last number of years, and that is that they became Crown Mazda. And if you look at the front of our brief, the cover of our brief, that's the view, and you can see the work that's been done is enhance the pylon sign. But more importantly, they put this molding, I'll call it, above the windows that show Mazda Crown. So there's been some, again, we call them refreshers, I guess. If you flip to page 2 of our brief, you'll see that what I mentioned a moment ago, this is purportedly a complete auto dealership, and it isn't, and would much more appropriately be called auto-related or service garage. But that's how the city has it, and that's why we're here today. Trying to figure out how to value it. We have, we go to page 3 is our brief. We've got 7,200. I don't know where 73 came from. I'll accept it if the board wants to make that change. Welcome to. I'm suggesting an $11 rent, because that particular property has some utility, because a similar building was built right beside it. There were 2 of them. That when they were initially built, they were intended to share off on the parking. That was to solve that land to building ratio, because there is no land. So we're suggesting 7,200. The 5% vacancy is typical, more typical of retail than 2%, which is more typical of residential. The vacancy has dropped from, the city has taken the position that vacancies has dropped from 5% last cycle to 2% this cycle, and that flies in the face of what's happened. There are dealerships that haven't been reopened, and the manufacturers. When Mr. Smith talks about the brand, what he's talking about is the manufacturers. So an example is Toyota. Sunrise Toyota was very, very successful in 1700 Waverly, and the manufacturers came and told them that if they didn't rebuild the dealership, they would lose it. So they built a new Toyota dealership across the way. They were unable, over a period of about 3 years, to get a new tenant to go out to Waverly Auto Mall, find a tenant in that. And some of the board members here were here on Friday when we talked about these dealerships. And that particular one is not called Automax, it just sells performance parts. It's not a car dealership anymore because there's no market for it. One of the most successful car dealerships anybody ever had is sitting closed, and that was Birchwood Motors in the corner of Moray and Portage. And that was a wonderful, magnificent, successful thing that gave us the Chipmans and Miguel Stevenson and the Jets, and all those wonderful things started on. It became after Birchwood pulled out and went to Points West, then Lone Star Motors went into it, a Mercedes dealership, and they pulled out. They built their beautiful one on Keniston. And the other one is now a used car lot. It's just nothing more than selling used cars. I don't even know if it's many. Then there's the Ford dealership that was right by the old border revision, right on Taylor and Pembina. And that's now King's Sporting Goods. They've just taken it, it's a local guy, converted it, but there's no other car dealership that filled in. McNaught's was exactly the same situation in 2003. General Motors told McNaught that he had to move or had to rebuild in the Image 2000, which is the look of that store. It's a new image store for General Motors. And he had no choice. He had to go and get a dealership, and he was unable to finance it on his own. And fortunately, and most dealerships, if not all, in Winnipeg are the land is non-arm's length because it's generally the family or a trust that's associated with the dealership. He had the benefit of Mr. Gauthier, who had another GM dealership in the other end of town, who ended up building it and leasing it, or Mr. Not built it, and he leased it from Mr. Gauthier. So the only reason that you could get a developer who would be prepared to build and lease to a car dealership was because that developer had car experience as well. And he operates as Ranjo, but he was the landlord. So that just talks a little bit about cap rate, why the cap rate is 8% and why it should be continuing. And in fact, the harsh reality, ladies and gentlemen, is 8% is much, much too conservative. There's huge risk in a car dealership. And if you just own the real estate, you're totally dependent on the success of the business. That if they are successful, you'll get rents, but they get income. There's no developers out there, as Mr. Smith again mentioned, that there's nobody doing dealership real estate investment trust as investment purposes. There's too much risk. So 8%, there's no transactions because there's no market for it. There's too much risk associated with auto dealerships. Now you've got a situation, and shooting off the top of my head here, but from 2012, when our friends at Amazon announced $60 billion in sales, and for 2019, when they get their final numbers, you project it could be 358 million. So the retail world is changing, and that's reflected. You can go to Costco and buy a car. You can buy a car through Costco, and you will be buying cars from Amazon and Showroom. So that makes it equally an additional risk factor. If you go to the next page of our brief, which is page 4, this just gives you some comps. I believe that these are closer to service, auto vehicle service than a car dealership, just because of the size and because there's only 1 acre. We do some work with Tim Hortons, and Tim Hortons won't entertain a location on less than 1.5 acres of land. So there's not enough land here to have a Tim Hortons. So vehicle service is much more, perhaps more appropriate. And that's on page 4 of our brief. And you see Sturgeon Tire, which is in South Tires, obviously, and it's at 1072. Maximum Muffler is right on Portage, not far from the old McNaught that was torn down. 970 Portage, and it's 1235 a square foot. Cal Tire, this is just on Route 90. That's a property that's contemplating doing big trucks because they have 11:1 land to building ratio. Their rent is $13.80. Carstairs on Chevrolet is $12.96, and Capital Ford is an interesting one. Capital Ford is right by Polo Park, and it is a legitimate car dealership. It is a whole car dealership, it's got everything. But the city treats it as being vehicle service related. And they're in there on a lease, and we couldn't get, there's a new asterisk there, because you don't have exact detail, but the reported lease is $10.14 a square foot. So looking at that, giving it a median of $11.38, it's, again, it's not car dealerships, but it's a lot closer. And our position in earlier hearings was that the city took a stab at valuing car dealerships this year, a unique stab, by putting in this looking in almost a principal substitution, saying, well, you can always sell car dealerships on a big box retail. Well, there's cars, but really you can't, obviously you can't. And we suggested that if you are going to try to do that blended payment between an industrial, or blended rate between industrial, which would be the service, parts, storage, versus a retail portion, which would be the front end of the house, which is the finish, the cappuccino bar, et cetera, you would have been better to use flex warehouses. You have a much better chance of selling a car out of a flex warehouse than you ever would out of a big box store. And if you go down Keniston, you'll see beautiful current flex warehouses that's going in the range of $10 to $11 a square foot. And they could be used to sell car dealerships more appropriately, I believe, than a big box retail. Getting back to the dealership, there's pictures starting at page 5. And that's just the, you don't have much of a sales office, but that's that desk at the front. There's a counter. You flip it over, there's room for a few cars. I think they can accommodate about 4 cars in here, or you could probably squeeze more in, but they display, I think, about 4 cars. There's some service check-in, I think, is on page 7. There's a bit of a service garage. You can see they've got about 4 cars that they're working on. I don't know if there's any on the other side. But it's small. They're kind of doing everything. When you look at some car dealerships, some even have tire storage on premise. So there's all different qualities of finish. So you've heard all the stories. I'd like the 5% reinstated as well. Getting back to page 3, we're asking for a rate of $11 a square foot for this unique full-service auto dealership that isn't. A 5% vacancy rate to reflect the actual vacancy, and we have talked about the Automax had changed and wasn't released immediately. We talked about Bertrand Motors, we talked about McNaughts. So there's a legitimate 5% vacancy. $350 for vacancy shortfall. Management fees, it's called management fees, it's really non-recoverable expenses. It's money spent over the life of the building that the landlord has to pay and can't recover from even a triple net client. You've all heard that story. And the structural is a component of that. And the 8%, we've had some decisions. I don't know what the board's position, I can submit them, but there were some decisions from this cycle that we rendered in mid-December, and they showed a 7 3/4 cap rate on car dealerships, and there are 3 legitimate car dealerships, 2 owned by Mr. Gauthier, the Gauthier Group, and 1 owned by the Dilawri Group, and they're $11.50. So I respectfully ask that the board consider an assessment of $858, rounded to $860, something like that. I have a bunch of rebuttal stuff, but I know in the last hearing we had, there was some question as to whether prior decisions would be accepted. I believe you already did in the previous hearing. I've got them here if you want them. If you don't want them, that's okay. And that's where we are, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Ms. Santucci?
Just for comparable 5, so you do agree that there is a new lease in place in that?
On comparable
So when I,
farm?
yeah, so when I reviewed it, it was a bit different and.
I didn't, 30,
For 555 Empress.
there is a new lease subsequent to this lease?
Yes.
No, I didn't know what
Oh,
it was.
that's my only question.
Thank you, Mr. Marks.
Yes, on this particular dealership, it
Yeah.
looks like there's been a substantial upgrade to the exterior.
They didn't redo the envelope, they redid the signage, which was part of the image. That's a requirement of Mazda that, to have the, two things happen. Mazda requires uniform signage from location to location, so you can't see it here, but you can see it in some of Brittany's briefs. They also redid the pylon sign at the front, that was important to Mazda. And they also renamed all of the larger dealerships, all got named Crown. So they crown everything that was added. So it's really, this is more signage than renovation, I would suggest.
Now, just looking at the interior, that looks like it's been upgraded as well. Has there been any permits taken out on this?
Not that I'm aware of.
It just appears like there's been a lot of upgrades done to the interior, like lighting,
Well, they have to
flooring.
you have to maintain them, and when you're getting, incidentally, that's another car dealership that closed, is Jerry Mazda Gordon. They were required to move into the Automotive, best of my knowledge, and they moved off of Pembina Highway, so you're just talking vacancy. It looks very nice. It's pretty basic. I don't know if you've been in the new Mercedes dealership, but you come in and they give you a cup of cappuccino and a biscuit, and you feel like you're in your living room. It's lovely. So they're making them pretty special. This is, in relative terms, I think is pretty sparse.
Okay. That's all my questions, thank you.
Ms. Locator?
Yes, Mr. Story, you've obviously inspected this property?
Yes, well, I've been in it many, many times. I've handled it since many years.
This is part of the Delari Group?
A lot of group, yeah.
Okay. So you would agree this is small at 7,300 square feet?
Well, it's not a complete auto dealership. It's more, it's vehicle related.
Right. And of course, as stated previously, the Mazda Crown, or Mazda, is
Yeah.
dictating the improvements on the building.
Well, to get the dealership,
Right.
what Mazda is very concerned about, or not Mazda, but all these manufacturers are concerned about is that they don't oversaturate and put too many dealerships too close together. So they play a big part in, to get the dealership, you have to pre-qualify where you're going to be, where the land is. That gets them to look at what other dealers there are. So you express an interest in a dealership, they see if it's viable, they look at who's in the market already. For example, Acura, they only have one here, they'll only allow one, because they don't think the market is any bigger than that. Lexus is, one is Toyota, the other is Honda, that's their upper end. They have a limited number of dealerships, they control it, the manufacturers, and they control it. And they tell these fellows what they can and can't do.
Just one more question. Due to the age of this, it's
88, I believe.
32 years old, and it's very small,
Yeah.
very small compared to
Yes.
many other dealerships. I'm just curious, and this is really rhetorical, I'm sure you don't know, but why wouldn't the manufacturer just say, we're done, we're closing this? Or you have to
Right, well,
relocate,
because
or...
they just got the Mazda, they just got a dealership. This has been a used car, it was used to sell cars before.
Okay,
And there's different grades of dealership and manufacturers. For example, a few years ago, Hyundai had a tough time getting dealerships, getting space, getting investors who wanted a similarly Kia. And they've changed over time, and now those two are both very popular dealership. Mazda's would be in that second tier of dealership. And so they would allow, you'd never get a major manufacturer agreeing to have a dealership in 7,000 feet. There's an interesting story anecdotally. In '89, Mr. Gauthier designed this gorgeous place with a basement and beautiful lower level finish with beautiful offices and whatnot. And General Motors immediately told him he didn't meet their criteria for image 2000. Mostly land building, but other things too. So that very dealership that he built, it was just a showpiece. It looked gorgeous, and there's nothing like it. Wasn't to the image of the manufacturer, and he had to go and rent and buy premises across the street on Watson behind him and down the way to offload some of his collision center and some of his other parts. So the automotive manufacturers have a great deal to say in where you go and where you are. And this is Mazda, I guess because they have Mr. Gordon expanded into the auto mall. Maybe that's why they allowed Crown to open that second location. I don't know.
Madam Chair, may I just redirect you? Ms. Santucci, I just have a question. Because you're using big box retail as rents, what's the vacancy on big box?
I'm not sure. I know we may use it as a rental comparable, but our model's not pulling strictly like that. I know it's confusing that we're using retail comparables because we're trying to substitute
Right.
and find a thing. But our model, I wouldn't say is based fully on retail. Like, we do have it listed as a vehicle dealership, and they do look into certain things for that.
Right,
I wouldn't say
but-
it's strictly based on.
But I am just asking, what is the vacancy?
I don't
You
know, because I don't work retail, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have a quick question about your rent.
Yes.
On page 4, you presented your comparables for vehicle service
Yeah.
leases.
Mhm.
You have a mean of 1138,
Yeah.
a median of 1235
Yeah.
across your 5 comparables, and yet you're using a rent of $11, which is lower than the mean and the median, and I'm not really sure what adjusted
And
is.
that's, the adjustment's probably because of the size of it. If you look at even these, with the exception of, I think it's a couple in here, 2 of them are bigger. It's just based on the fact that this is not there's no market for rental of small auto dealership of 7,000 square feet. It's just where the rent usually should be. But the mean and median, the comps are higher, yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
And so how did you choose 11 then?
We've been doing a lot of partnerships for a long time. Not just here, but in another market, we do a lot in Calgary. We think that the 11 is what the market would probably demand if someone were to invest in it and buy it to lease it. That's all they could expect to get. Might be low. At one time, we had a break point. They were done very simply, the dealerships. And that started, I think, in 2011, but it was based on up to 25,000 square feet. They were 1250, and below that, or above that, they were 1150 a square foot. 8% vacancy, 5%, pardon me, 5% vacancy, 8% cap rate. And that was sort of the cookie cutter approach, knowing that there's no developer or investor out there who typically buys car dealerships to rent them there to the dealers. So I can't really answer that, and it's just a gut feel. Let's say
Okay.
that.
Thank you, Richard. Any need for summation or desire? No? Mr. Story?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That concludes 3690 Portage Avenue.
Thank you very much.
And the next one on our docket is 823 Regent.
Oh, it's a used car one.
Hilarious. Hello, Mr. Borgstrom.
Good morning.
everybody temperature wattage is cool in here? Okay.
Okay.
I have a fever, but I'm leaving.
Okay,
We're not talking about anything new car dealership here.
okay, we'll just get you sworn in
Yeah,
first.
but Genesis is actually, that's an upscale Hyundai brand, is an interesting, so,
Nice car, actually.
but there are no dealerships.
No.
You order it and it comes.
Yeah.
Bradford Scott Borgstrom.
They swear that the evidence represented is true, double true, and true shall be done.
Say
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mr. Sturdy?
Have a good day.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Ms. Santucci, when you're ready,
Thank you.
823 Regent Avenue West.
This is file number 19-3772, roll number 09007 505 400. Address is 823 Regent Avenue West. We have this listed as a complete auto dealership. We have 2 years built, so we have the 1996 and the 2004, so I'm assuming there was an addition. And we have a leasable area of 24,546 square feet. If you turn to page 2, I have an aerial photo here. This shows the property is located on Regent Avenue West. And I just have one exterior photo from 2018 and then just the one single interior photo. I don't have any photos of the service garage. Page 3, just the request for income and expense which was received. No subject sale history, and the subject property lease we just have is the owner occupied. On page 4, the vehicle dealership income workup. So we have a rental rate of $10.99 per square foot. Vacancy loss of 2%, expenses at 2%, and shortfall at $6, and an overall capitalization rate of 7.15%. The estimated value is the $3,582,000. So on page 5 is the rental comparables we've gone over. Again, I'll just cross out the auto ones, and on page 6 we can cross out the improved sale comparables. So pretty much the only ones I was looking at were just the 27 big box homes that we've already gone over. Page 7 is just the income value summary. 8 is the mall drive capitalization rates. 9 is the municipal assessment act excerpts. And on the start of page 10 is the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. So on page 11 you just see fully owner occupied. We just have listed some expenses in the leasable area. On page 13, just to confirm not applicable, it's owner occupied. And page 15 is the Board of Vision addenda I've already gone over, so I won't go over that again. And my recommendation today would be to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $3,582,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. Mr. Borgstrom, any questions of the assessor?
I do have some questions. So I want to start with your page 1 and the land to building ratio.
Yes.
Typically with, and this is a used car dealer, right?
Yes, from what I can tell, Autolist wasn't like your
Yeah.
typical Toyota or Honda.
It's not a,
It's a main
I guess
brand.
it's a big 3 now. Yeah, it's not a main line. They sell all different models of used cars, right?
Mhm.
And in terms of the use as a dealership, would you agree that the land to building ratio at 4.87 to 1 is a little skinny? Typically, they have much larger areas.
Yeah, I would think the standards would be from like, I've seen some like 6, 8 seems to be common, some of them are a bit bigger.
So that would be a factor that would affect the leasability of the property, correct?
Possibly, I guess depends how they can, like, the site plan and stuff, so.
And in terms of a car, we call it a BCD, but in terms of a used car lot, that would affect the amount of rent it might attract?
Yes, if they needed a specific amount.
Now, this particular, and I'm going to assume that you haven't inspected it,
I have not.
And you're not familiar with it at all?
I've unfortunately never been in this building, so.
Did you have an opportunity to receive records on the structure?
I just had brief looked over the notes. There was nothing that stood out, so.
So this structure with its size is primarily sales and showroom, correct? The actual service area is quite small?
I don't have a breakdown, but if you say it's smaller than it.
And in fact, would you agree that there is no collision center on site as part of this?
No, from what I understand, it's just, there's obviously the rear spot, but then the front offices and.
Now, you have limited your rental comparables to the previously discussed big box
Yes.
rents on page 5. You agree with me that all of the big box rents are fully air conditioned?
I would assume with most retail companies, they would have air conditioning.
And that would not apply to the service area in the subject property, would it?
Typically, I feel like the ones that I've been in, unless they're newer, are just fans, like big fans.
And similarly, this isn't a location that would attract a big box operation, correct? The site is simply not big enough for a big box operation.
I think it would have to be to the site shape,
Okay.
would be a bit odd,
Yeah.
because they probably couldn't build as wide as they want.
Now, I know you've already addressed the question of vacancy previously, but you're comparing it to big box retail. Bear with me. So if we look at the valuation of income producing properties for 2020, I have it marked and it fell off, bear with me. You agree with me that retail and RET categorization would attract a 6% vacancy rate?
For retail, from what I can see here, standard retail would have 6, and then there's different ones that would
Right.
obviously have different
And if
ones.
we took a look at the RWC, which is the big box designation, that would be 4%, right?
4% for retail warehouse,
Right, which is the big box.
yes.
And similarly, if it was a vehicle service related, for example, we're gonna be looking at Fountain Tire today, out on, Cal Tire, out on Brookside, that kind of vehicle service garage would attract a 4% vacancy rate.
Yes, for every vehicle service repair.
And you've already indicated that you don't know how the model came up with 2%.
I can't speak to how they determine that.
And the capitalization rate similarly, and I know you've already asked and answered today, you don't know how the model came up with 7.15, given the absence of sales of dealerships that aren't related to the business rate.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they looked at specifically.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borgstrom. Ms. Linklater?
My question's been asked and answered, thank you.
Mr. Marks?
None for me, thank you.
And I have no questions. Mr. Borgstrom,
Well,
are
that
you
just went
ready?
way too fast, we should stretch it out. So I'm gonna start on page 3. And that just gives you a breakdown. There was originally, in 1996, excuse me, a one-story structure constructed with 16-foot wall height, and then they had two sort of like a two-part addition in 2004. One was a one-story, which I believe is the shop area, and the other is the two-story front part, which houses the offices and showrooms, etc. You can see an oblique on page 4 at the bottom. That will give you a sort of an overview of the L-shaped site, so they have access from regions and from the side street. And you can see there the cars on the site, and in questioning, I had asked the assessor about the land to building ratio, and they are, I'll describe it as quite cramped. The top picture, you will see there at the sort of left side of the picture, on the top picture on page 4, those are the vehicle service bays. Roughly 1/6 of the area, if my calculations are correct, are that sort of vehicle service area. They do not have a collision center on site. So I took a look at a number of vehicle service related comparables. I will tell you that number 1 on our page 7, that's not auto at 1322 Waverly. That is a fully arm's length lease between not auto and the owner, who is a large real estate holder within the city. That lease is, the rate that we show there is based on the rent step that kicked in January 1st, 2018. That site has a large land to building ratio, like quite large, certainly much larger than the subject, but it's an older property spread over several buildings. So it's a much larger site, but a much older building as well. The balance of these are vehicle service related. Some are body shops, some are tire shops, some are vehicle repair, like VSG's vehicle service related direct shops. 752 and 8 is what actually works out to be the average and the median. In this particular case, given the particular characteristics of the subject property, I've applied $9.50 a square foot on the total of 24,546 square feet. You'll recall that I questioned the assessor about the model rates for vehicle service garages, RWC, and retail. We're suggesting 4% in this case, as we will in the other properties this morning. And that's what we've applied. We've applied the $6 per square foot shortfall, and I know we've all heard the argument about the non-recoverable, and I won't address it specifically other than if there are questions arising from the submitted information. We continue to suggest 7% as a rate for non-recovered expenses, and the cap rate, given the age of the subject property, its configuration, we've actually applied 7.25% here. So based on all of that, we're looking for a reduction to $2,790,000, and that is what we wanted to submit, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Borgstrom. Ms. Santucci, do you have any questions for Mr. Borgstrom?
No, I don't think.
Mr. Marks?
Done for me, thank you.
Ms. Linklater?
You inspected, Mr. Brooks?
I have not.
Did anybody in your office?
I believe that they have, but I actually didn't include pictures here, and I didn't look for them either. But it would be uncommon for a property like this over a period of years that we've been doing it, not to have been gone through at this point.
Right.
For this cycle, I have not.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
I had one, but now I have to find it. Oh, your rent.
Yeah.
Your rent comparables have an average of 7.52 with a median of 8.
Yeah.
You've used 950.
Yeah.
Considering site-specific attributes.
Yeah.
So, of not more than 950 per square foot. So what are the specific site-specific attributes when you?
It's skinny on the land to building ratio.
Uh-huh.
It does not have a collision center associated with it. The service area is relatively small. And I know there was lots of talk about the new car dealerships, and I'm going to tell you that the new car dealerships, their margins are fairly skinny on the sales themselves. Where they make the money is on the other stuff, the services, the vehicle services. The selling of the ancillary things like tires and so forth. That's where they make a good chunk of their money. My understanding of the auto industry is that the the sale of the vehicle itself, pretty skinny. That's why you will never see, you're not gonna get a monster discount off of any list price. Because their margins are relatively thin. So because this property has a relatively small surface area, that was another consideration in my estimate of $950.
And just a quick question about your cap rate of 7.25. You cite Altus's Altus Group cap report. Did it specifically talk about dealerships? It
We do
didn't
not
talk
have
about
dealerships in ours because they just don't sell.
Right.
When they close, typically the use changes, and we've gone through a number of examples today.
Right.
So it is, when I'm looking at it as almost a blend of retail with what I'll call industrial. For vehicle service garages, I think that they are most akin to industrial properties, industrial type properties. And so that was sort of the blend that I came up with there.
Thank you so much. Thanks for
Can I
clarifying.
ask one question?
Yes, of course.
On that dealership there, I would assume that their back shop area is more for detailing and cleaning cars up prior to
I
sale.
believe that that's correct.
Okay.
Typically, and to be honest, I'm driving a used car right now. I don't take it back to the place that I bought it from. I typically go to a service garage that I trust, where I know what people. So.
Thank you. Any more questions, Mr. Wong?
No, thank you. That's great.
Any need for summation, desire for summation?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes 823 Regent.
I apologize for being so brief.
Nobody's complaining. Okay, we'll now deal with number 5 on the docket, 554 Pembina Highway. Ms. Santucci, when you're ready.
This is file number 19-3216, roll number 12097805550. Address is 554 Pembina Highway. We have 2 buildings on this site. We have an office building in front of it, located on Pembina Highway, and then in the rear we have the newer vehicle service related portion. So we have a few actual year builds, the 1929 for the original and 2017. And we have a leasable area of 25,390 square feet. So this was actually replotted, has the 2 buildings on it. So on page 2, we have the aerial photo, just confirms the offices at the front of the portion, and the car related in the back. The exterior photos here, just of the enterprise at the front, and the JMS Collision Center. On page 3, these are just interior photos taken by my coworker, just to show the interior of the property. So we have obviously like the front portion of the front desk and some office space. Also included photos of where the cars are worked on. There's a paint booth on the one there in the middle. Some storage as well. On page 4, we have the upstairs of the newer building. So, the one should be, the top left was still from the main floor, just some more storage. The rest of the photos are just of the kitchen area, so it's sort of the staff area, vacant office, what could be, I guess, a smaller meeting room. I don't have any photos for the front building. I actually had a sticky note on this brief to go and inspect, and then I realized it was today, so I didn't inspect it, but I was going to. This one, there's a bit of a difference. The owner had actually contacted us about the mezz space in the first building that's fronted onto Pembina, so there might be some issue in regards to us having too much mezz space. I'm not sure. I didn't get to inspect. I brought it up to Mr. Workstrom, so I'm going to kind of go through that and see where we are. But it was brought up to us that there may be too much space on the second floor. So on page 5, I have the request for information. So nothing was sent because it was a replot, so we don't have anything associated with this roll number, but everything's good there. Subject sale history, none. Subject property leases. So the enterprise, there is a lease place for that, just filled that out there for $13.80 per square foot. On page 6 is the office portion. So we have 2 different spaces. We have the leasable area on the main floor as 3,031 square feet, and the second floor, I think we have is 2,296 square feet. The issue there was, I think, depending on how much space was open to the main. But I will inspect that after. I don't know if it was much. From what I could calculate, there was an issue of maybe 297 square feet. And for our property here today, we have a rental rate of $15.29 applied to the main floor, $11.11 for the second, which gives us a blended rate of $13.49 per square foot, which is around what the lease is in place. And for the vacancy loss for the office, we have a 5.5%, expenses at 2%, shortfall at 7%, and a capitalization rate of 6.7%, which gives us an estimated value of $963,000. So for the rent comparables, I've listed 6. I tried to find ones located on Pembina. Unfortunately, there was none in like the 500 block. I tried to find ones that were close. They range from, there's some at 1,667 square feet all the way up to 7,208 square feet. The newest ones are the comparables 1 to 4. The average is $13.12 and the median is $13.21. On my page 7, we have the vehicle service garage. We have listed a leasable area of 20,063 square feet, and that is combined for the main floor and the mezzanine second floor space. And we have a rate of $16.11 per square foot. Vacancy loss of 4%, shortfall of $4.50 per square foot, expenses at 2%, and capitalization rate at 6.4%, which gives us the estimated value of $4,695,000. On page 8 is our vehicle service comparables. So when I handed this in, I hadn't reviewed some of them in full detail. I had a hearing Mr. Boardroom, and I've reviewed a bunch of them. There is some I would like to remove. For example, comparable 13 is the subject property. That is not an arm's length. It's owner occupied. So comparable 13 can be scratched out or stricken out. Comparables 21 and 22 are owner occupied, was determined by a company search, so I'm removing comparables 21, 22. Comparable 1, 960 Pembina, has common ownership with the property owner and the tenant, so we'll strike out comparable 1. And comparable 24, I'm going to strike out just because I'm still waiting on a phone call back from the person who submits the mailer. There's a bit of issues with the fact that the building is much bigger. What they write on the mailer shows a smaller square footage with the higher, in turn a higher net per square foot. So I'm just going to cross that one out until we can further examine. And other than that, I'll just remove those ones, and I think my revised average and median is still similar. I think my average is at $13.95 and my median's at $12.50. So I'll leave those there. They also vary in age, sizes, location. These are just all the ones that we have on file. On page 9, I have the income value summary, just showing both income streams together. So we get the net operating income of $364,961 and a capitalization rate of 6.45% for an estimated market value of $5,658,000. On page 10 is the capitalization rates, model derived. Page 11, Municipal Assessment Act excerpts, and then on page 12 is the start of the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. So on the front page, they have gross checked off. They have a rental income submitted, a few expenses. It doesn't state fully owner occupied, but it has been determined that the JMax is obviously owner occupied. And we have on page 15 The lease for the enterprise enterprise rent-a-car. So it just shows about it doesn't have the leasable area, so that's why I just included what we have on file to come up with my $13, I think it was, and 80 cents. So what I did write on page 5, I'm not sure if that's maybe based on a different square footage. But what they do submit is just what the monthly rent is received. On page 16, just more of the mailer, and page 17 is the 2020 Board Revision Addenda information. Gone over, so my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $5,650,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. Mr. Borgstrom, any questions?
I do. So there, let's look at page 2, and the second up from the bottom picture, there are 2 separate discrete structures on this site,
Yes.
right? And the one that we're looking at there on page 2, and the second from the bottom picture, that's the 2-story office building, correct?
Yes,
And that's the OFS income stream, right?
yes.
That's an arm's length lease?
I only stated what I could determine from the
Right.
mailer, but I'm not sure. It's not.
Enterprise is a different company than.
It is a
yours.
different company, I just didn't know if there was maybe some things included, if it was a true net lease.
Okay, so let's take a look at your page 15, and you'll see there, that's the tenant verification form. You
Mhm.
see that, yes?
Yes.
And so that's the lease rate that was in place. But do you see as you go further to the right, that property taxes
Yes.
are included in the rent?
Mhm.
And so it's not a net rent, it's actually a semi-gross rent, right?
Yes.
So you would expect in this case for the owner, the tenant, to be paying for the utilities?
Yes, so I would assume the tenant's paying utilities, but I can't say with 100% certainty, so.
Now, so Enterprise is in one building and the body shop is in a second building, correct?
The newer.
And the Enterprise rent-a-car will, by virtue of its operation, require space for its rental vehicles, right?
Yes.
And similarly, the body shop would require the same thing, correct?
Yes.
So if we take a look on page 1 at your land-to-building ratio, 1.75 to 1, that is, I will politely describe it as inadequate.
It's low, yes.
Yeah, it's really low, right?
I just don't know, being in the building, if they have a lot of space to put the cars in the actual building, so I can't
Well,
speak to that.
we've got your pictures there, and
Yeah.
I've got some in mind.
Mhm.
And so as you look through the space, obviously the upper space, the mezzanine space,
Mhm.
can be used for vehicles.
Mhm.
And the vehicle-related space at the east end of the structure would be, the pictures on page 3.
Mhm.
Is that a fair representation of the space back there?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if they have like cars lined up to kind of still have to come in the building, or how many they can kind of fit in those bottom left-hand.
But as they are working on vehicles, while they may work on more than one at a time, they certainly don't have the space that other auto body shops have for
No.
customers to park their vehicles while until they're serviced,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Typically, they're just gonna be left there, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if we take a look at your rental comparables and you show them on page 8, each of these would have larger land-to-building ratios, correct?
I don't have them here today, but some of the ones I looked at do have,
Quite a bit
Quite
larger,
large.
right? Yeah. And this property was actually constructed new, arising from a total loss fire a few years ago.
that's what I saw in the notes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borgstrom. Ms. Linkletter, any questions?
Yeah, just, so page 6, 7, and 9 are all model.
Yes, all model.
So Mr. Borgstrom's just brought up the fact that this building is new.
So the office portion at the front has been there for a while, and the vehicle service garage was the newer portion.
And that was built in 2017, I'm gonna say?
Yes.
You don't have any permits?
I didn't include them in here. Unfortunately, I normally do, but I guess I didn't.
And I've just noticed your vacancy has gone up to 5.5 on the office.
Yes.
Well,
At
on
4%.
the OFS component,
Yes.
which is the model rate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
it's the model rate for
Yeah.
OFS.
And then the vehicle one would be the higher than the
Right.
previous properties we've looked at.
That's all my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marks?
My question's been asked, and you answered things.
Okay, and then I have your questions.
Okay,
Mr.
I
Borgstrom?
have included, this property has been inspected, let me start again. I inspected the old property that was on the site prior to the fire, and it has been re-inspected by a colleague within my office, and we've included those pictures of the new structure in the rear of our submission. We have also included zoning requirements at the rear. I can tell you that the city allowed this construction to happen, and now there are issues with the continuance of this use because of the low land building ratio. So that's still, we haven't included that within our valuation, but it is a reality with this property, and it may affect it going forward, certainly in the future. So I'm gonna start at page 9, and we took a look at the standalone office building as already described. It's a 2-story office building. There is a lease in place. I did look at rents. The net rate, as I calculated on a per square foot basis, works out to $12.60, converts down to $12.66 a square foot net. That's 84 cents per square foot with a property tax expense. As I said, I took a look at rental comparables, and even 3 of the 6 rental comparables the assessors provided support that rate for the structure of this vintage. And so that's what we've applied. We have adopted the 5.5 vacancy, $7 shortfall. We are applying again on page 10, 7% non-recovered expenses. In this case, we have submitted our separate office cap rate study for something of this vintage. Should be 7.25% for this property. We then move on to the vehicle service garage. The city has applied $16.11 per square foot. Given, yes, it's newer, yes, it was built for their use in this location, but given the land to building ratio and the use of some of the site's lands for the office building, enterprise rent-a-car, we've looked at these rental comparables on page 11 and are applying a $12 per square foot rent to this structure. And for the balance, we are adopting the city's 4% vacancy, 450 shortfall on page 11, moving to page 12, 7% non-recovered. In this case, we disagree with the 6.4%. Certainly the land to building ratio is going to have a significant impact on the potential risk of any investment in this property for rental purposes. We've applied 7% based on all of that. We show the mathematics on page 13 and include, based on all of that, the assessment should be reduced to $3,808,000. And with that, I am open for questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Santucci?
Based on your comparables on page 11, which comparables do you think would be most similar to this subject?
So I can tell you that 4, 5, 7, and 10 are all auto body shops. And the other ones are vehicle service related. And so, in terms of use, those would be the most similar, but obviously the subject property being built in 2017 is much newer. These ones, I'd suggest have a much higher land to building ratio than
Okay.
subject.
That's all my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marks?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Langford?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. All right. Any need for a quick break, or shall we just keep jumping along? Everybody's good? All right, we'll just keep going. 1777 Brookside Boulevard. Ms. Santucci, when you're ready?
So for this one, this will write up the file number. So file number 19-2824, roll number 1410000045000, address is 1777 Brookside Boulevard. So, in regards to, I'm gonna be asking for non-compliance that the assessor requested burden of proof be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation for section 53(3)B of Municipal Assessment Act, and then for reduction in assessment is ordered that it follows section 54, 3.2 of the Municipal Assessment Act. So if we turn to page 10, I have included the 2017 income expense questionnaire. And just to show on page 11, so it's being an owner-occupied property from what I understand, there is no expenses listed. It was similar to what happened as well in the previous cycle. So to confirm that there was owner-occupied, I had the company search on pages 15 to show the Brookside Business Center, which is the owner. And page 17 shows the tenant, the Cal Tire Limited, and just shows the common ownership between the directors' information. So they do have this information, and they just haven't been submitting any expenses. So that's why I'm asking for the non-compliance today. And they knew about it last year, and it was confirmed, and they haven't submitted it this year again, so.
Thank you very much. Mr. Borgstrom, do you have any questions?
I do not, and based on the assessor's submission, it looks like while it was returned, it looks to me to be substantially incomplete.
And so are you contesting the burden of
We
proof?
are not.
You're agreeing with the burden of proof?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then I guess you're up. Oh, before I let you go, does anybody on the panel have any questions about that?
None for me, thank you.
Ms. Langford?
No, but I did just want to say on page 10 of your brief, you've got the private user ID.
Oh,
Oops.
sorry. I should have,
Private user ID.
Mark that out.
Should be taken out here. Right there, yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I just get a quick, break, just to get my light up?
Sure, we'll just recess for a
Yeah,
couple
just
minutes.
a couple minutes. Do that, because if not, I'll forget.
Turn it over to you.
Okay,
If they let us go.
I'd like to call this meeting back to order. Mr. Workstrom, when you're ready, 1777
Thank you.
Brookside Boulevard.
So this property is located on the east side of Brookside Boulevard, just south of Inkster Boulevard. It's almost beside the Tims, if you've ever been out in that area. And so it was built on page 3, just a quick description, built in 1989. Has a plan area of 24,035 square feet, and the total gross floor area reported is 25,307. The city reports it as having a 23-foot wall height, but I think that only applies to the vehicle service area, and the sort of the showroom and offices have a somewhat lower ceiling height. So we take a look at an oblique and an overhead on page 4, and you can see that this is not a tire place that deals with regular automobiles. They deal with trucks. So the extra space on the site is needed for that route. Now, oh, there's the Tims. So there is a need for the additional land in this particular instance for this use. Took a look at rental comparables. We've already looked at these on page 7. So 329 Oak Point Highway is a standalone vehicle service garage. 1870 King Edward is in relatively close proximity. They do trailers, truck trailers and trailer repairs. And 344 Oak Point Highway was once upon a time owned by Paul's Hauling. That's actually Denray Tire, so that's an actual tire facility. It was subsequently bought by the tenant, but that lease rate was in place as a step rent as of 2017. So we took a look at those. We looked at the built in 1989. I thought, or my opinion, that $10 would be the appropriate rent to apply to this space. $12.47, as the city will tell you, is the model rent on this. I thought was a little steep given it's what it is and these rental comparables. And so no disagreement on vacancy or shortfall. We're using 7% unrecovered. I have bumped the cap rate to 7.25 from the model rate of 6.55. And so based on all of that, we're seeking a reduction to $2,900,000. Short and sweet. I agree with the assessor that the owner and the occupant are related corporations, so the rental rate reported here is not an arm's length lease.
Thank you very much. Ms. Santucci, any questions?
No question.
Ms. Linklater?
You said you inspected this?
I have not.
Oh,
I have
sorry.
worked on the previous cycles. I've driven by it a bazillion times, but I have never actually gone inside. It's, they do truck tires there.
None of your colleagues have?
No,
Because I know we're
this
normally.
is actually my client, and
Okay.
so I am familiar enough with it that I didn't feel the need to.
That's all my questions, thank you.
Mr. Marks, any
No
questions?
questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Ms. Santucci, when you're ready?
Thank you. This is file number 19-2824, roll number 14100045000, address 1777 Brookside Boulevard. So this is a car-related building, built in 1989. We have a lease area of 24,035 square feet. If you turn to page 2, just an aerial shot, we looked at the building. We have, there's a bit more of a retail storefront, but I would say the entrance would be to the west here, that portion. Exterior photo, and on page 3, just some interior photos of the more, it's like just the smaller entrance space, I guess, compared to where everything else is kind of. The tires are stored in the car-related service area. So on page 4, I have a request for information. Subject sale history, there is none, and owner occupied. On page 5, we have the model drive parameters. So we have a rental rate of $12.47 applied to this property. And we have 4% vacancy, 2% expenses, and $4.50 for shortfall. And our capitalization rate based on the model is 6.55%. Estimated market value of $4,239,000. So my comparables I've went over, and just again, comparables 1, 13, 21, 22, and 24 were determined not to be arm's length, and the issue with 24 is just the area. On page 7, income value summary. I think everything else has pretty much gone through. Nothing from the mailer we took into account. Again, it's owner occupied, the rent not applicable for the market. And my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $4,239,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Borgstrom, do you have any questions for the assessor?
I do not.
Mr. Marks?
None for me, thank you.
Ms. Linklater?
Yes, Ms. Santucci, page 6 of your brief. Are any of these tired?
Oh, 1 second. If I get my.
Oh, yeah, I should have had that, okay, no.
Comparable 11, comparable 15, comparable 22, comparable 26, and then I'm sure.
22 is excluded.
Or sorry, it's 22.
That's.
Oh, sorry, I'm reading from my updated one. I printed out, sorry.
Okay.
I'll look at the addresses, I'm sorry. Okay. So it's at 17 and 27 comparable on my sheet. And 31. I would say the difference is the location for some of these being a bit more.
Sorry.
So some of them are higher, but
Did you say 17 also?
I.
Could you tell me those again, just because
Sorry.
we started and then you
Okay,
changed them?
sorry.
And- Just the numbers are fine.
So comparable 12.
12, okay.
Comparable 17. Comparable 27. And comparable 31.
Can you also tell me what they were? I know the tire, but what,
Fountain tire.
are they all fountain tire?
Those ones are. And then, oh, sorry, and then comparable number 2 is also the Cal tire.
So your comparable 31, 2014, it's got, it's not, it's got a 28,
Yes, that's the highest.
so
That's what they put on
it
the
just sort
mailer.
of makes me wonder what else is going on there.
That's just what they submitted based on the mailer, so.
Okay. Thank you, that's all my questions.
Thanks. I also have a question on your comparables. Just looking at the area, you did mention that some of the differences here could be as a result of location.
Yes.
But then looking at the area, Brookside Boulevard, any comparables that would kind of be out that way?
So King Edward, I think the applicant also has that one, number 33. That one's a larger property, larger building. Okay. Let's see. There's one on Pembina that's 12,000 square feet, that's comparable 7.
And are these also tire places or?
Comparable 7, let me see. That That would be an auto body.
Auto body, okay. And the one out on King Edward is what, comparable 33?
That one is a truck and trailer.
Truck and trailer what?
That's just what I have the tenant as, so they would do work on cars and
Okay.
variant, or no, is that one?
Semi-trailer rigs.
Semi-trailer rigs, okay. And then another one I have is 36. Comparable 36 is, no, not 36, comparable 36 is 9,000 square feet. That one is an auto body as well.
Okay. Okay, and I have no further questions,
So, arising from
Yes.
questions of the board, and I neglected to give this out earlier, we do have a rebuttal package with respect to the assessor's rental comparables. And I really only want to touch on 3 of them, and I'll leave the rest for you to go through. Pretty sure you've seen this.
I have,
already.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. There should be a garbage file. So, the ones that I'm gonna address specifically are the mountain tires. Those the assessor has identified as number 12. Bear with me. Number 31. The other one.
17.
Thank you. So, and I'm just gonna touch this really briefly. What I've included here is actually the rental comparables on page 4, and I've highlighted them. This is from the assessor's brief for today. We did some digging, not nearly to the extent, given time constraints, that we should do. But and I'm gonna take you through, but I'm telling you that I think that there's some interconnectivity as between Fountain Tire and Goodyear Tire and Treadmark Properties, who is the owner of those 3 properties. You'll recall that the assessor has already excluded comparable number 1. We show that on page 5, and that's because it's actually owned by Goodyear, and there was a relationship between Goodyear and Fountain Tire. So we took a look, and if we could just take a quick peek at page 6, and this is just a printout from their website, and it just very briefly says, Fountain Tire is a privately owned company whose shareholders are management at 51% and Goodyear Canada at 49%, so there's a relationship there. And then it says individual stores are typically owned by Fountain Tire and a local manager, with all financial services provided by Fountain Tire. It says Fountain Tire and Goodyear have adopted a strategy where real estate holdings are not their preferred use of capital, and as a result, certain commercial properties are available for purchase with long-term lease commitments from the tenant. Well, these are, so this is almost like a lease-to-own situation. More than that, and I'll get into it in a moment, there is some interconnectivity as between Goodyear and Treadmark. So if you take a little bit, take a look at page 7, those are the 3 properties in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, 1329 Henderson, 165 Inksbrook, and 3020 Portage. If you take a look at page 9, that is an excerpt from the 2014 annual report of the Alberta Treasury Branch. And you'll see there where I've highlighted at the top, this chap, and I don't pretend to pronounce his last name, but I'll call him Brian. His principal occupation was the chair of Fountain Tire Ltd. And you'll see below, he was also a director with Treadmark Properties. So there's, in my view, there is an relationship. It's not a clean arm's length relationship. And so on page 11, similarly, this is the following year in 2015. You'll see there that he is the former chair and chief executive officer of Fountain Tire now. following year, but he's still on the board of directors with Redmark Properties. So at the very least, that leads me to conclude that these are leases that certainly we wouldn't rely on. And given the more retail-like locations of the other comparables, I'll leave that with you. There's an extensive viewing. The assessor has already accepted some of our conclusions here with respect to whether or not they're arm's length. And actually, the only other one I want to bring to your attention very quickly is number 23 on St. Mary's Road. Just bear with me while I get there. That's going to be shown at page 75 of our information. That's actually separated into two separate buildings. Now, it used to be occupied by Sturgeon Tire, but it is now occupied by St. Leon's Gardens, and I suspect that's outside, but also Breathe Easy Eco Solutions. That is not a vehicle service garage-related use. And so I'll leave you to go through the other ones. I do include on page 77 and following some information on the MPI Service Center at 1284 Main Street, which the assessor has already excluded, but all of that information is contained in here. So happy to have you go through each of these yourself. I'm happy to answer any questions the assessor may have.
Thank you, Mr. Boardroom. Ms. Santucci?
Just in regard to Treadmark, did you do a company search to determine if, like, what directors were for Treadmark currently and what was for Fountain Tire?
Well, currently is a very different matter than the lease dates that you've used in your information, and certainly around those dates, there was at least a connection between the parties.
So
Some
even-
commonality in the directors, if you will.
Okay, because even with the number of directors, only having the one who was no longer with Fountain Tire and is now with Treadmark. And then there's also, I guess, the issue of, Treadmark states the partnership is for them at least, the real estate investment with all triple net leases. And also that Fountain Tires are typically 50% Fountain Tire, 50% local.
I'm not
owners, so
saying that it's 100%,
Yeah.
100%. I'm saying that there is a relationship that's between, where there is commonality. That's easy for me to say. Where there is a commonality in the officers of corporations, we will not use those as rental comparables just because of the, in my view, where they are not fully arm's length, we won't be using them.
Okay, but you do agree that he is no longer on the, he's not a director at Fountain Tire?
I haven't researched the corporation. It looks to me like from the 2015 reporting from ATV that is in fact the case, but I have not actually searched the corporations. But when you look at the lease dates, and these, like, so 1429 Henderson Highway, that Fountain Tire has been there for many, many years. And so that lease was set up certainly at a time when he was there and there was a relationship between the companies. Similarly, on Portage Avenue, that building's built in 1972. It's been there for years and years and years. And same thing, right? So he would have been there when the leases were put in place. And similarly with 165 Kingsbrook, in 2014, absolutely that lease, if that's the commencement date, and it is, absolutely the evidence shows that he was there in 2014 when that lease was placed on the property.
But you would agree it's quite convoluted because we don't really know where the local managers are negotiating as well, because they do have 50% ownership.
Well, I don't think it's convoluted at all. All I'm saying is that there is a connection and a relationship as between the corporations.
Okay. That's pretty much my thoughts on it. Ours is, it's a difference of opinion. I've researched it. I was the one who did the company searches and kind of went on both websites, and I found it to be with one person and.
And so when we do corporate searches, we don't do it electronically. We actually go down and pull the physical files down in the company's office, so that we can actually go back and look at historical when at the appropriate time that we were referring to, so we know who was involved, and that's how we make that determination. So.
Ms. Linklater, do you have any questions on the rebuttal?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Lenz?
No, thank you.
And I.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stop.
Okay.
Let's move on to our last property, 1761 Sargent Avenue. Ms. Santucci, when you're ready.
Thank you. This is file number 19-3976, roll number 07569002000. Address is 1761 Sargent Avenue. So the property, we have a couple year builds, the 1989 and 1990. And we have a gross, or leasable area of 19,072 square feet. So for this property, when you turn to page 2, I'll go over, there is a gas station and a car wash located in the southwest corner. And then we have the car-related and the office portion in the larger building setback from Sargent Avenue. Exterior photo. At the bottom, on page 3, the request for information received. We have an older subject, sale history from 10 years prior to reference date. Subject property leases, from what I can determine from the mainland. Unit 400 has a $9.75 rental rate applied to 4,000 square feet. Unit 200 is actually, from what I can determine, a gross rent. Unit 300 is vacant since July 31st, 2017. And Unit 100B has a rate of $12.50 applied. And the gas station, it's pad site, so it works out to the $3 per square foot for the land area. And I'll get into what they pay for rent as we move along. So on page 4, we have the vehicle service garage income workup. We have 2 areas, and we have a blended rate of $14.24 per square foot. Vacancy loss of 4%, expenses at 2%, and a capitalization rate at 6.55%. So we have additional building value added onto this income stream when it should be added on to another income stream. I'm not sure if I was moving the stuff around to kind of make the rate flow a bit better, but also to be my error of changing income stream order. So I'll leave the $193,000 of additional value to talk about when we get to the gas station. So the capitalized value for the vehicle service garage should be $2,040,000 there. On page 5 is just the rent comparables. Again, I've crossed out comparables 1, 13, 21, 22, and 24. On page 6, I have the vehicle car wash. So it's 768 square feet with a rental rate of $9.29 per square foot. We have the vacancy loss at 2%, expenses at 2%, shortfall at $4.50 per square foot, and a capitalization rate of 5.55%. On page 7, we have the store kiosk with pumps. The rental rate we've applied is $33.94 to the 816 square foot leasable area. We have a vacancy loss of 2%, expenses at 2%, and shortfall at $6, and a capitalization rate of 6.3%. So we should have the additional value for the pumps, tanks, and shelter on this income stream, which is the $193,000. I actually reviewed it today at work before I came here. The pumps are $64,000, the tanks are $96,000, and the shelter is $33,000, just separated out. So if we turn to page 8, I have my gas station car wash pad site comparables. Based on the size of this store, we have comparable 7 is 840 square feet. Comparable 6 is 1,336. Comparable 5 is 990. So those would be closest in size. And then for the car wash, we have $10.50 used, and then $7.72 for just the straight car wash comparables at the bottom, and $14.51. If we turn to page 9, we come to the fourth income stream, which is the office portion. We have, 2 premises here, and we've applied, to the main floor, or to the 5,000 square feet, $13.56, and to the second premise, the 2,379, $15.16. So a blended rate of $14.08. This one has a vacancy loss of 5.5%, expenses at 2, and shortfall at $7, and an overall capitalization rate of 6.7%. I chose some rental comparables. So based on the comparables, the rent is about $2 higher if I'm looking at the per square foot rate. My range for my comparables is $10.07 up to $14.75. I tried to find some that were closer to the subject. I would say maybe the Border and Dublin ones are closest, comparable 6 to 13. There's a couple on Ness, and then the other ones on Portage, again, are located on Portage Avenue, a bit different than being located on Sargent Avenue. And on my page 10 is just the combined 4 income streams. So we get a total net operating income of $260,000 with a capitalization rate of 6.55%. And we have an estimated market value of $4,169,000. Page 11, capitalization rates, model derived. Page 13 is the start of the income and expense questionnaire. So it does show that there's some vacant space. They've listed as 22% for that unit. On page 15 is the income statement. So I reviewed it. The only thing that stood out was the principal mortgage interest, which I removed, which still gives us a net operating income of only $44,811 approximately. On page 18 is the start of the tenant verification. So this is just where I found the information for the rental rates per square foot for the current units. So for the pad site, what I looked at was just that they pay $42,000 a year. And when I reviewed what we have in our model, I think our combined for the car wash and the gas station was $34,830. So it's a close value. And other than that, we've already gone through most of my addenda. So my recommendation today would be to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $4,170,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. Mr. Boardroom, do you have any questions for the assessor?
This property is an investment property, right?
Pardon?
Is an investment property. It's leased.
Yes.
It's not owner occupied in any.
Not that I could find. I found that all the rents seemed fair that I reviewed.
And so, we take a look at your page 2 now, and I appreciate that it's the way the window is set up, but we've got 2 structures on the site. One is the gas bar and car wash, convenience store and car wash, and one is the office and VSG.
Yes.
In the office, in looking at the middle picture on page 2, the office and VSG are connected to each other, correct?
Yes.
And that is actually at the top of the middle picture, right?
Yes.
And the pumps, tanks, and canopy, you've already said are valued separately. You can see there the canopy sort of on the west side of the site, right?
Yes.
It's at the corner of Sargent and Route 90.
Yes.
So, you, on your page 3, you show a number of the leases in this property. And you also show 100, unit 200. Unit 200 is actually office space, right?
Yes, from my understanding when I was looking at the note. I've never been in the building.
You show there a gross rent. Do you know what that works out to in terms of net?
I didn't work it back. I didn't.
But even if you just take off the $7 shortfall
Yeah.
allowance, that would still be
$11, yeah.
and change.
Mm-hmm.
And then the model rate is
It's
considerably
higher, yeah, even higher than my comparables.
Okay. And if we look at the comparables, lease from 2017.
I just realized I forgot to go over that, but it was a lease ad from 17, which confirms the $11 for the second floor and then the main around.
As an asking rent.
Yes, asking.
And you might achieve something less than that, right?
Mhm.
Usually.
Yes.
Now, do you know if the office building has an elevator in it?
I don't, I've actually never been in this building, and I was trying to map out which portion was for which.
Maybe you can help me and steer me to your office rent comparables.
Oh,
And I
yes.
just, I keep
On
thumbing
my
through it.
page, there's so many income streams.
Yeah.
On page 9, I have my comparables that I,
There we go. And those are for your office, right?
yes.
And so certainly, the model at 1407, your rental comparables suggest something of a lower rent than that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't, I've never been in this space, so I'm not sure why it's coming in so high. But I know I've been in Border, and it's close by office space, kind of in a similar, I would say, industrial feel of an area, so.
Now, were you aware that this property had some vacancy issues prior to it being released in May of 17?
I
On
was not.
Unit 200?
Oh, yes, so when I read in here that it had been vacant, that was pretty much the gist of it. I didn't have any notes on further issues.
Now, this isn't a, classic location for an office space, right?
No, I wouldn't say
No.
there's a ton of offices in that
Yeah,
area.
and in fact, being adjoined to or attached with and part of a structure built simultaneously for vehicle service garage, there's an auto body shop in there, right? And that would have a lot of paint fumes and exhaust and that, so not an attractive office location.
No, I would.
If we take a look, and these are just, with respect to the VSG income stream, that is same rental comparables you applied before.
Yeah, it's just the same as we've gone over.
And again, this complex will share some of the land with the gas station, some of the land with parking for the office occupants and their visitors.
Yeah, and I think based on the lease, it looks like about 14,000 square feet is for sure just the gas station.
And in terms of the capitalization rates for your vehicle car wash and your SKP, which is a stored kiosk with pumps, there really aren't any sales of gas stations, right? When they go vacant, they either go vacant long term, typically scraped after a period of time.
I'm not too familiar with if there was sales or anything like that.
And you don't know how the model came up with 5.55 on a car wash.
No.
And in terms of the, I already asked the question about the vehicle service garage, but the same thing would apply with cap rate rates. Model rent, not actual rents. So if we're applying rents that are too high, the sale of vehicle service garages, do you know if they're vetted to see if the business went with those?
I haven't reviewed any, so I'm unsure.
And those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borgstrom. Ms. Linklater, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Mr. Marks?
Well, thank you.
And I have no questions. Mr. Borgstrom?
So the city's model has applied 4 income streams. I've combined that into 3, just because I'm combining the gas bar, convenience store, and the car wash into one unit. So I'm going to start at page 6. Let me first tell you that in 1989, that's when the gas bar was built. And then in 1990, part 2-story, part 1-story office and VSG was constructed on the site. page 6, the entire property is leased, and so we took a look at the office space. I can tell you that Unit 200 was previously leased at $10 per square foot net. It was known to be expiring on April 30, 2016, and in fact, it did in fact go vacant for an extended period of time, in fact a year. The information we show on our table is actually misstated. The Unit 200 actually leased commencing May 1st of 2017. So the gross rent in place as of the reference date on that space, 1853. I wasn't going to try and allocate expenses on a per square foot basis between the gas bar, the car wash, the vehicle service garage, and the office space, so we applied the shortfall rate of $7 a square foot. It's not going to be terribly far out. That works out to $11.53 a square foot net. The main, and I can tell you, I have inspected this building. There is no elevator in the office, and the other main floor unit, which is office space, is the Braemar Auto Group, and you'll see there that they occupy 2,379 square feet at $12.50 a square foot. That was a lease renewal. It was a post-reference lease renewal, but if you look at our page 4, I do in there indicate in the last sentence under the analysis, I use information which would have been known by any purchaser as of the reference date. That lease renewal, they would have either given notice and being vacated or in a process, or they would have renewed. And so that's why I applied the May 1st rent 1 month after the reference date. It would have been known as of the reference date. And so based on the actual rents in place, $11.80 per square foot, $11.84 per square foot is what we're applying to the OFS income stream. Notwithstanding the 12-month vacancy, give or take, we're still applying 5.5% vacancy, which is the model rate, 7 shortfall, again 7% non-recovered. In this particular case, and we have filed a separate office capitalization rate study based on that. 7.25% is the rate that we've applied for the office income stream. Next, on page 8, we took a look at the vehicle service garage. You'll see there 6272 square feet is vacant, and has been vacant since Enterprise, I think it was Enterprise vacated. Has not, or certainly was not, as of the reference date released. Based on the rental comparables below, on that size of space, we applied $8.50 per square foot. And the Braemar Automotive Center, which is related to the office space in the building attached, they leased that space at $9.75 a square foot. That's a stepped up rate on May 1st of 16. And so we applied that blended rate to come up with roughly $9 a square foot overall for the VSG space. Certainly in line with the rental rates we're showing there. And again, no further adjustment for what used to be the Enterprise space. It is not, in my mind, reached a stage that it is chronic. And so we're applying the 4% vacancy rate, 450 shortfall, which is the standard for VSG. We do disagree with the city's 6.4 cap rate. We applied, based on the studies that we presented with this, 7.25% is more appropriate for this space. With respect to the convenience store and the car wash, we are accepting the city's model rent. Typically, I break it down between the two, but the amount of dollars that we were talking about here wasn't worth really arguing about here. And so we have adopted the city's revenue for this property, the model rent. We disagree with their vacancy rate. We applied 5% in our valuation. That's based on a blend of VSG and retail being 6%, which is the convenience store. And the car wash is more VSG related, and so we've applied 5% for that. 525 is the shortfall rate, and that's a blend between retail and vehicle service garage. And that's what we've applied for the shortfall rate. non-recovered at 7%. I don't know how the model comes up with 5.55 for the vehicle car wash for something built in 1989, but we've applied 7.25%, which would be appropriate for the retail and the VSG component, or vehicle car wash, similar to vehicle service related. The mathematics on page 11. Now, the city, just double check our figures here. Okay. So I'm going to adjust our value because there's a typo in here. So based on all that on page 11, I'm going to add $49,000 to our adjustment because it should be 194 and not 145. So we're looking for a reduction to $2,768,000. That's based on an adjusted additional value attributed to the bump fence and canopy. And so with that, I am open for questions.
My only question was in regards to page 8. So the vacant space would apply to different net market rent per square foot too.
Page 8.
Page 8,
Yeah.
for the vehicle service card.
Yeah.
I was just wondering the difference in obviously what Braemar and the vacant space, is it just due to quality or?
Well, size jumps right out at you. And when you look at what Braemar's renting for, that's a body shop,
Mhm.
right? The vacant space at Unit 300 used to be, I believe, an enterprise rent-a-car.
Okay.
That's a different use, or national rent-a-car is one of the other. That's a different use, and so I looked at the market and we showed those rental comparables. Based on that, that's why I applied 850 to that space. It's a different, it will have very different setup as a VSG related space.
Is there like an office portion from the old rental car?
If my recollection from my inspection is that it was quite small, facing at the front,
Okay,
but it was nothing substantial.
okay. No questions.
Mr. Marks, do you have any questions?
Yes, because there have been many different tenants in this facility, have there been many upgrades done internally as far as?
I can't speak to the upper space, and the assessor has included hers in there. My understanding is that the tenant that moved into the second floor office space took the space as is. With respect to the former rental car agency in the BSG portion, nothing will have been done in there subsequent to the previous tenant vacating. Other tenancies have been in there for a period of time, and I think I did this property last cycle. Just going by memory. So there was nothing, during my inspection, there wasn't anything that really popped out at me that I made note of going, this has been substantially upgraded.
Okay.
It would be what I would describe as average condition for its age.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Ms. Linkletter?
Just to clarify, the space that had been vacant, I think you said for a year?
Well, yeah, there's two spaces with
Right.
vacancy, right? One was the office space,
Mhm.
that's on the second floor. That was vacant for about a year. And then the former rental car agency, I don't think I have the exact date that they vacated in there. Yeah, so I know that they were in there when I inspected it with the previous reassessment 2018, but where the space was still signed with their space in it, but it's now vacant.
Yeah.
So it was the second floor space that I was referring to that was vacant for a year.
Right. This was built as an investment property? like you had mentioned in the beginning?
Yeah, you know what, I don't know its origins, other than in 1989, there was a gas bar built there with the car wash, and then in 1990, they added the other.
Yeah.
It's one structure, but it's a little odd because it's two-story office kind of at the front and the VSG at the back with the access to it at the north side of the building and access to the VSG portion of it, and then the office portion of it, of that VSG space is from the south side of the building.
Yeah, it is odd. And you're using actual rents?
Yes. Other than for the vacant space where I've attributed market rent, yeah.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
And I have no questions. So that concludes our hearing today. Thank you very much.